The deputy's hand closed around her throat in front of the entire town. Nobody moved to help. That's when the mountain walked in. Welcome to a tale of survival, betrayal, and deadly justice in the frozen heart of Wyoming Territory, where a woman everyone wanted dead found protection from the one man the entire frontier feared. If you love stories of courage against impossible odds, stay with me until the very end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel across the world. Now let me take you back to the winter of 1884, to a place called Blackthorn Ridge, where Mercy died in the cold. The snow fell like broken glass. Evelyn Cross pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of Miller's General Store, trying to make herself invisible. It never worked. In a town like Blackthorn Ridge, invisibility wasn't an option for a woman marked as cursed. The store's interior smelled of tobacco, leather, and the particular kind of judgment that settled into frontier towns like rot in old timber. 3 women stood near the bolts of fabric, whispering behind their hands. Their eyes cut toward Evelyn with the same cold precision their husbands used when gutting deer. "Shameful," one of them hissed, loud enough to carry. "Walking around like she has a right to be here." Evelyn kept her gaze down, focusing on the shopping list crumpled in her palm. Flour, salt, coffee, if there was money left. There wouldn't be. There never was. Old Man Miller stood behind his counter, arms crossed over his stained apron. His face carried the same expression it had worn for 3 months now. Disgust mixed with something uglier. Fear, maybe. Or the particular brand of cruelty that came from believing yourself righteous. "I don't serve criminals," he said flatly. "I'm not a criminal, Mr. Miller." Evelyn's voice came out smaller than she wanted. You need to leave my establishment." Miller's knuckles went white against the counter edge. "Before I have the deputy remove you." The 3 women near the fabric tittered like crows. Evelyn felt the familiar burn behind her eyes, the tightness in her chest that came before tears. She wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of these people who'd already decided her guilt without trial, without question, without a single goddamn moment of compassion. 4 months ago, a gang of outlaws led by a man named Cutter Hayes had terrorized the Wyoming Badlands. They'd robbed trains, burned homesteads, and left bodies scattered across 3 territories. When Marshal Kane's posse finally cornered them in a canyon outside Laramie, they found Evelyn among the gang's camp supplies, half-starved, bruised, and barely conscious. The marshal saw a victim, a hostage who'd survived hell. The town of Blackthorn Ridge saw something else entirely. They saw a woman who'd ridden with outlaws, a woman who'd shared their campfires and probably their bedrolls, a woman whose brother had been part of that gang until he got himself killed in a shootout. Never mind that Thomas Cross had been trying to rescue his sister when he died. Never mind that Evelyn had been kidnapped, beaten, and held prisoner for 7 months while the gang used her as cook and maid and whatever else they wanted. Facts didn't matter much when fear needed a target. "Mr. Miller, please." Evelyn stepped forward, hating the desperate edge in her voice. "I have money. I'm not asking for charity, just flour, and I said get out." The door banged open behind her. Deputy Wade Granger filled the doorframe like a bad omen. He was a thick-shouldered man with a face that seemed designed for sneering. His badge caught the weak afternoon light filtering through the store's grimy windows. "Problem here, Miller?" "This woman won't leave." Granger's smile didn't reach his eyes. It never did. "That's so, Evelyn? Causing trouble again?" "I just want to buy supplies." "Well, that's unfortunate." Granger moved closer, boots heavy on the wooden floor. "Because Mr. Miller has a right to refuse service to anyone he chooses, especially known criminal associates." "I'm not—" Evelyn bit down on the rest of the sentence. Arguing never helped. It only made things worse. Granger's hand shot out and grabbed her arm. His fingers dug in hard enough to bruise. "Let's go, before I decide you're disturbing the peace." Evelyn tried to pull away. His grip tightened. "Let go of me." "When I'm good and ready." Granger yanked her closer, his breath hot against her face. It smelled like whiskey and rotting teeth. "Maybe if you were a little friendlier, folks around here might be more inclined to help you out. You understand what I'm saying?" She understood perfectly. She'd understood for months now. Deputy Granger had made his intentions clear 3 weeks after she'd returned to Blackthorn Ridge, the night he'd cornered her outside the boarding house and suggested she might earn her keep in ways that didn't involve money. Evelyn had slapped him hard enough to leave marks. He'd been making her life hell ever since. "I said let go." She twisted against his grip, panic rising in her throat. The deputy's other hand moved toward her face, and Evelyn knew with sick certainty that he was going to hit her. Right here, in front of witnesses, in front of the whole goddamn town. And nobody would stop him because in Blackthorn Ridge, Wade Granger wore a badge, and she wore the stain of survival. Then the temperature in the room dropped. Not literally, but something changed in the air, a pressure shift that made every person in that store go suddenly, instinctively quiet. A shadow fell across the threshold. The man who stepped through the door had to duck his head to clear the frame. He stood somewhere north of 6'4", with shoulders that seemed carved from the same granite as the mountains surrounding the town. His coat was pieced together from wolf pelts and elk hide, stitched with the kind of crude efficiency that spoke of necessity rather than craft. Beneath the coat, layers of buckskin and wool covered a frame that looked like it could break horses barehanded. But it was his face that made people step back. A scar ran from his left temple down through his eyebrow, across his cheek, and disappeared into the dark beard covering his jaw. The eye on that side still worked, pale blue and cold as winter sky. His other eye held the same frozen color, the same absolute absence of anything resembling mercy. Boone Mercer didn't come to town often. When he did, people remembered why they feared the high country. The mountain man's gaze swept across the store's interior, past the women frozen near the fabric, past Old Man Miller gripping his counter like a shield, past the deputy's hand still locked around Evelyn's arm. His eyes stopped there. On that hand, on those fingers digging into flesh hard enough to leave marks. Granger felt it too. Evelyn watched the deputy's face shift from cruel confidence to something else. Something that looked almost like childhood fear, the kind that came from knowing you'd done something wrong and the consequences were walking straight toward you. "This doesn't concern you, Mercer," Granger's voice tried for authority. It came out shaky. Boone said nothing. He just kept walking. Each footstep sounded like a judge's gavel. 3 steps. 4. 5. He crossed the store in complete silence, except for the creak of floorboards under his weight. He stopped less than a foot away. Up close, Boone Mercer was even more terrifying. He smelled like pine smoke and animal blood and winter itself. A rifle hung across his back. A hunting knife the size of a short sword rode his belt. His hands, scarred, massive, and absolutely steady, hung loose at his sides. "Let her go." The words came out quiet, flat. No threat, no anger, just a simple statement of what was about to happen. Granger's fingers spasmed tighter around Evelyn's arm for just a second, male pride warring with survival instinct. Then survival won. He released her. Evelyn stumbled back, cradling her bruised arm. "Like I said," Granger managed, "this doesn't concern you." Boone's scarred face showed nothing, but his hand moved, slow, deliberate, to rest on the knife hilt at his belt. The deputy went white. "Jesus Christ, Mercer, I'm the law here. You can't just—" "You're a coward with a badge." Boone's voice still hadn't risen above conversational volume, "and I'm tired of watching cowards hurt people who can't fight back." For a moment, Evelyn thought Granger might actually go for his gun. The deputy's hand twitched toward his holster, his face flushed red with humiliation and rage. Then reason caught up with pride. Wade Granger was mean. He was cruel. He enjoyed hurting people weaker than himself, but he wasn't stupid enough to draw on Boone Mercer. "This isn't over," Granger spat. He backed toward the door, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "You're making a mistake, Mountain Man." "Probably." Boone didn't move. "But it won't be my first." The deputy fled. Silence settled over the store like fresh snowfall. Old Man Miller looked like he wanted to protest, to defend his deputy, to restore some sense of order to his disrupted afternoon. But the words died before they reached his mouth. The 3 women near the fabric had gone absolutely still, clutching their purchases like shields. Boone turned to face the shopkeeper. "The woman needs supplies." His voice remained flat, emotionless. "Flour, salt, coffee, whatever else she came for. Now see here, Mercer, I have a right to refuse. You have a right to get paid." Boone pulled a leather pouch from inside his coat and dropped it on the counter. It landed with the heavy clink of silver coins. "She has a right to spend money in a public establishment without being assaulted by your deputy. We all have rights. The difference is I'm willing to enforce hers." Miller stared at the pouch. "Package her supplies," Boone said, "or I'll do it myself and take the cost out of your hide." The shopkeeper's hands shook as he started pulling items from the shelves. Evelyn stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. In 4 months, not a single person in Blackthorn Ridge had defended her. Not one. The marshal had cleared her name legally, but socially she remained guilty of the unforgivable sin of surviving something that should have destroyed her. And now this scarred stranger, this legend that mothers used to frighten children into behaving, had walked into Miller's general store and forced the entire town to treat her like a human being. Boone's pale eyes shifted to her face. "You hurt?" The question caught her off guard. My arm, it's fine. Let me see." Before she could protest, he'd moved closer and gently, impossibly gently for hands that large, pushed back her coat sleeve. Purple bruises already bloomed where Granger's fingers had dug in. 4 distinct marks, proof of violence witnessed and ignored by everyone in this room. Something flickered behind Boone's scarred face. Not quite anger, colder than that. "I'm okay," Evelyn said quickly. "Really. Thank you for... you didn't have to..." "Yes, I did." Miller finished packing supplies into a canvas sack with exaggerated care, clearly hoping the mountain man would take his goods and leave. Boone swept the package off the counter and handed it to Evelyn. "That should last you a few weeks." "I can't accept this. It's too much. I don't even know..." "You don't need to know me." Boone's voice softened slightly, just slightly. "You need to eat. Winter's getting worse. Storm's coming in tomorrow that'll bury this town for a week." Evelyn looked down at the supplies in her arms. Real coffee, good flour, salt, even a small sack of sugar she hadn't dared hope for. Her throat tightened. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you help me? Everyone else in this town is afraid." Boone turned toward the door. "Fear makes people cruel. I got no use for either one." He walked out without waiting for a response. Evelyn stood there holding her supplies, feeling the weight of 3 women's stares like brands against her skin. Miller wouldn't meet her eyes. He just swept Boone's coins off the counter and into his cash box with the speed of a man trying to pretend something hadn't happened. But it had happened, and everyone in Blackthorn Ridge would know about it by nightfall. Bashsek. The walk back to her shack took Evelyn through the frozen mud of Front Street. The temperature had dropped another 10 degrees since morning. Her breath came out in white clouds that disappeared into the gray sky. People stared. They always stared. But now the whispers carried a different edge. She caught fragments as she passed. Mercer actually threatened Wade. Defending that woman. What's the mountain man want with her? Let them talk. They'd been talking for months anyway. At least now her arm ached from carrying supplies instead of being grabbed by a deputy who thought his badge made him untouchable. The shack Evelyn rented sat at the eastern edge of town, where Blackthorn Ridge's pretense of civilization gave way to wilderness. It was barely one room, warped boards, a roof that leaked when it rained, and a stove that smoked more than it heated. The owner charged her twice what the place was worth, knowing she had nowhere else to go. Evelyn pushed inside and dropped her supplies on the rickety table. Her hands shook as she unpacked them. Real coffee. When was the last time she'd tasted real coffee? 7 months ago. The morning before Cutter Hayes' gang rode into the homestead she'd shared with Thomas. She pushed the memory away and focused on inventory. With careful rationing, these supplies might last 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if she stretched them. After that, she'd face the same problem she'd been facing for months. How to survive in a town that wanted her gone, but wouldn't quite commit to running her out. How to live with the weight of Thomas's death and her own guilt for surviving when he hadn't. How to wake up every morning in a place where cruelty was casual and kindness was extinct. Except it wasn't extinct. Not completely. Boone Mercer had proven that. Evelyn sat on her bed, a thin mattress over a wooden frame that groaned under the slightest weight, and let herself remember details. The way he'd moved, the absolute calm in his voice even when threatening violence, the careful gentleness when he'd examined her bruised arm. She knew the stories about him, of course, everyone did. Years ago, Boone Mercer had been different. He'd had a wife, a son. They'd lived in a small cabin south of Blackthorn Ridge, trying to build something permanent in an impermanent land. Then sickness came. Scarlet fever, or maybe cholera. Nobody agreed on the details. And the town had done what frightened people always did. They'd quarantined. They'd isolated. They'd left Boone's family to die alone rather than risk infection. The wife died first. The boy lasted 3 more days. When Boone finally came down from his cabin carrying 2 bodies wrapped in blankets, the town had offered condolences and casseroles and all the empty gestures people made when they'd abandoned you to hell and wanted to pretend they hadn't. He'd buried his family. Then he disappeared into the mountains. That was 6 years ago. Since then, Boone Mercer had become something else, something halfway between man and legend. He trapped in the high country, selling pelts twice a year when he needed supplies. He spoke to almost nobody. He'd killed 3 men in those 6 years, all of them outlaws stupid enough to try robbing him, and walked away without a scratch each time. The town feared him. The territory respected him. And today, for reasons Evelyn couldn't begin to understand, he'd chosen to defend her. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Evelyn tensed. Visitors never brought good news. "Who is it?" "Eleanor Hawthorne," a woman's voice, educated and firm. "May I come in?" Evelyn knew the name. Eleanor Hawthorne ran the town's only boarding house, a respectable establishment that wouldn't have accepted Evelyn as a tenant even if she could afford it. She was older, maybe 50, with the kind of stern competence that came from raising children alone on the frontier. Evelyn opened the door. Mrs. Hawthorne stood on the crooked porch, wrapped in a good wool coat with a basket over her arm. Her face was weathered but kind, or at least not openly hostile, which qualified as kindness in Blackthorn Ridge. "Miss Cross, I won't take much of your time." "Mrs. Hawthorne." Evelyn stepped back, suddenly aware of how pathetic her living situation must look to someone respectable. Please, come in." The older woman entered and set her basket on the table. She looked around the shack, taking in the gaps in the walls, the struggling stove, the complete absence of anything resembling comfort, and her mouth tightened. "This is unacceptable," Evelyn bristled. "It's what I can afford. I'm not criticizing you, child. I'm criticizing the man charging you rent for a structure that should be condemned." Mrs. Hawthorne pulled back the cloth covering her basket. "I brought bread and some preserves. Don't argue. I made extra, and they'll spoil if not eaten." The kindness hit harder than cruelty ever could. Evelyn felt her eyes burn. "Why? Why what? Why are you being kind to me? Everyone else is afraid." Mrs. Hawthorne echoed Boone's earlier words. "They're afraid that what happened to you might happen to their daughters, that the world is crueler than they want to believe, that survival sometimes requires compromises they couldn't imagine making. So they turn you into something other than human, something they can judge without confronting their own cowardice." Evelyn sank onto her bed. "You don't think I'm guilty?" "Guilty of what? Being kidnapped? Surviving?" Mrs. Hawthorne's voice hardened. "I've lived on this frontier for 30 years, Miss Cross. I know what men are capable of when they think nobody's watching. I also know the difference between a criminal and a victim. The town doesn't agree with you. The town is run by cowards and hypocrites." The older woman pulled a small jar from her basket. "This is salve, for bruises. I heard about what happened at Miller's store." Of course she had. News in Blackthorn Ridge traveled faster than winter wind. "Boone Mercer helped me." "So I heard." Mrs. Hawthorne's expression shifted, surprise mixed with something else. Approval, maybe. "That's, unexpected." "You know him?" "I knew his wife, Sarah. We were friends before—" She paused, old grief crossing her features. "Before the town failed her. Failed both of them. If Boone defended you today, it's because he recognizes what you're enduring. He's lived it himself." Evelyn turned the salve jar in her hands, not trusting herself to speak. Mrs. Hawthorne moved toward the door, then stopped. "There's a storm coming. A bad one. If this shack becomes uninhabitable, you come to my boarding house. I don't care what anyone says." "I can't pay. I didn't ask if you could pay. I said come if you need shelter." The older woman's voice softened. "You've survived worse than this town's judgment, Miss Cross. Don't let them break you now." She left before Evelyn could respond. The storm hit the next morning exactly as Boone had predicted. Snow fell in sheets so thick that buildings across the street disappeared into white nothing. Wind screamed through the gaps in Evelyn's walls with a sound like dying animals. The temperature dropped so far that water froze solid in its bucket within an hour. Evelyn fed precious wood into her stove and tried not to calculate how long her supply would last. 3 days? Maybe 4. Then she'd have to choose between freezing and spending money she didn't have on fuel that would be price gouged to hell during a blizzard. The storm raged for 2 days straight. On the 3rd day, it paused. One of those brief respites that frontier blizzards sometimes offered before resuming with renewed violence. Evelyn used the break to venture outside, desperate to assess the damage and maybe scavenge some fallen branches for her stove. The world had transformed into white desolation. Snow buried everything to waist height. The street was gone. Buildings looked like they'd been half swallowed by winter itself. And the cold was murder. Evelyn made it maybe 30 feet from her shack before the wind picked up again. She turned back, lungs burning from frozen air, and that's when she saw him. Victor Langley. He sat astride a massive black horse, flanked by 2 ranch hands on smaller mounts. All 3 men wore heavy coats and the kind of casual arrogance that came from owning half the territory. Langley was maybe 50, handsome in the way successful men often were. Good bones beneath expensive grooming, confidence mistaken for virtue. He owned the largest ranch within 100 miles, supplied beef to half of Wyoming, and held enough political influence to make marshals nervous. He was also the secret architect of every robbery Cutter Hayes' gang had ever committed. Evelyn knew because she'd heard them talking. Late at night, when the outlaws thought she was asleep, they'd discuss their benefactor. The rich man who fed them information about train schedules and payroll routes. The respectable citizen who laundered their stolen money through legitimate business. She'd never seen his face during those months, but she'd heard his name. And when she finally returned to Blackthorn Ridge, she'd recognized Victor Langley immediately from wanted posters Thomas had shown her years ago. Her brother had suspected connections between legitimate ranchers and outlaw gangs. He'd been investigating when Cutter Hayes' men found him. Now the man responsible for Thomas's death sat on a horse outside her shack, smiling like a snake in expensive clothing. Miss Cross, his voice carried the smooth warmth of practiced charm. Terrible storm. I wanted to check on your welfare. Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm fine. Are you? Langley's gaze swept over her shack. This structure doesn't look particularly sound. I'd hate for something to happen to you. The threat was there. Subtle, but there. I appreciate your concern. Evelyn kept her voice level. But I can manage. I'm sure you can. Langley walked his horse closer. You're quite resourceful. Surviving 7 months with Cutter Hayes' gang requires flexibility. There it was, the insinuation, the reminder that in this town's eyes, she was damaged goods. What do you want, Mr. Langley? Want? He smiled wider. I'm simply being neighborly, though I confess I am curious about something. During your time with Hayes, did you happen to overhear where he might have hidden certain valuables? Evelyn's blood went cold. She had overheard. One drunken night, Cutter and his lieutenant had argued about a lockbox. Railroad bonds worth $50,000, buried somewhere in the Badlands after their biggest score. They'd drawn a crude map, planning to recover it once the law stopped looking. Then the marshal's posse had cornered them, and Cutter Hayes died with a bullet through his skull. The bonds were still out there, and Victor Langley wanted them. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Langley's pleasant mask slipped slightly. That's unfortunate. You see, those bonds belong to me. Hayes was holding them temporarily. I'd very much like them returned. Then you're admitting you financed the robberies? The mask fell completely. Victor Langley's face went hard and cold. I'm admitting nothing, but I am suggesting that your continued residence in Blackthorn Ridge depends on your cooperation. This town already despises you, Miss Cross. It would take very little to make your situation untenable. Are you threatening me? I'm offering you a choice. He gathered his reins. Tell me where Hayes hid my property, and I'll ensure you're treated well here. Given a proper home, perhaps even employment at my ranch. Refuse, and he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I don't know where the bonds are hidden, Evelyn said. It was mostly true. She'd heard them mention landmarks, a twisted juniper, a red rock formation, a dry creek bed, but she'd never seen the actual location. I think you do. Langley's voice dropped to something ugly. And I think you'll remember eventually. For your sake, I hope it's sooner rather than later. Winter can be very dangerous for someone in your circumstances. He rode away, his ranch hands following like loyal dogs. Evelyn stood in the snow, shaking, not from cold, from fear. Victor Langley had just made his intentions clear. He would squeeze her, threaten her, isolate her further until she either gave up information she barely had or died from the pressure. And the town would let him do it because in their eyes, she was already guilty of everything except being human. She stumbled back inside her shack and barred the door. For the first time since returning to Blackthorn Ridge, Evelyn understood that she might not survive the winter, not the storm, the men who controlled it. Heats. 3 more days passed. The storm intensified. Snow piled against Evelyn's door until she had to dig her way out each morning just to reach the outhouse. Her wood supply dwindled to almost nothing. She burned chair legs, then floorboards, then pieces of the table. The cold became everything. It invaded her dreams. It made her bones ache. It turned simple breathing into labor that exhausted her before noon. On the 6th day of the blizzard, someone hammered on her door. Evelyn opened it to find Wade Granger and 2 deputized ranch hands. The deputy's face still carried bruises, not from Boone Mercer, but from his own humiliation at being backed down. "Pack your things," Granger said. "What?" "You're being evicted. Owner says you haven't paid rent." "That's a lie. I paid through the end of the month." Granger shrugged. "Take it up with him, but right now you're leaving. In the middle of a blizzard? That's murder. That's unfortunate." The deputy's smile was pure cruelty. "But the law's the law. You got 20 minutes to gather your belongings. After that, we clear the structure by force." Evelyn knew protest was useless. This was Langley's work. He was tightening the noose, using the storm itself as a weapon. She packed what little she owned into a single canvas bag. Clothes, a few personal items from her life before. The supplies Boone had bought her. Granger watched from the doorway, enjoying her fear. "Where will you go?" he asked mockingly. Mrs. Hawthorne withdrew her offer this morning. Seems she had a change of heart about harboring criminals. Another lie. Evelyn saw it in the deputy's eyes. Langley had gotten to Eleanor Hawthorne somehow, threatened her business, maybe, or her reputation. "There's nowhere else." "Then I guess you'll freeze." Granger jerked his thumb toward the door. "Out. Now." Evelyn stepped into the blizzard. The wind hit her like a fist. Snow blinded her within seconds. She stumbled forward, heading where? There was nowhere to go. Every door in Blackthorn Ridge was closed to her, every warm building barred. Behind her, she heard Granger laugh. Then the sound disappeared into the storm. Evelyn walked because walking was all she could do. She wrapped her coat tighter and pushed against wind that wanted to shove her into snowdrifts deep enough to bury her completely. Her feet went numb within minutes. Her hands followed. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to keep moving or die. The town disappeared behind her. Buildings became suggestions in the white chaos. Then they became nothing at all. Evelyn Cross walked into the wilderness, carrying everything she owned and nothing that could save her. Somewhere ahead, the mountains rose toward a sky she couldn't see. And in those mountains, in a place called Raven Hollow, a scarred man sat by his fire and felt winter's violence in his bones. Boone Mercer stood. Something was wrong. He couldn't say what, couldn't explain it. But after 6 years alone in the high country, he'd learned to trust the instincts that kept him breathing. He pulled on his wolfskin coat, checked his rifle, and walked out into the storm. Somewhere below, someone was dying. And for the first time in 6 years, Boone Mercer decided that maybe, just maybe, he still gave a damn about saving them. Boone found her 2 miles into the mountain pass, half buried in a snowdrift like something already dead. He almost missed her. The storm had reduced visibility to maybe 10 feet, and Evelyn's dark coat blended into the shadows between drifts. But movement caught his eye, her hand, still clutching the canvas bag, fingers twitching in the snow. Still alive then, barely. Boone dropped to his knees beside her and rolled her onto her back. Her lips had gone blue. Ice crystals clung to her eyelashes. She wasn't shivering anymore, which meant her body had stopped fighting the cold. Maybe another 30 minutes and she'd be past saving. He didn't waste time checking for injuries. In weather like this, hypothermia killed faster than anything else. Boone stripped off his wolfskin coat and wrapped it around Evelyn's frozen body, then lifted her against his chest. She weighed almost nothing, all bone and desperation. Her head lolled against his shoulder, unconscious or close enough that it didn't matter. The wind screamed through the pass like something alive and furious. Snow hit his face hard enough to draw blood. Boone turned his back to the worst of it and started walking. His cabin sat another 3 miles up the mountain trail, hidden in a grove of ancient pines where the cliffs created a natural windbreak. 3 miles in good weather was maybe an hour's walk. In this storm, carrying a dying woman, it might as well be 30. Boone's legs burned after the first mile. His lungs felt like they were being scraped raw with each breath. Ice formed in his beard, weighing down his jaw. But he kept moving because stopping meant dying, and he'd already watched 2 people he loved freeze to death. He wasn't adding a third to that count. Evelyn stirred against him once, mumbling something he couldn't hear over the wind. Her hand found his shirt and gripped it weakly, like a child afraid of being dropped. "I got you," Boone said, though she probably couldn't hear him. "Just hold on." The storm tried to kill them 6 different ways during that walk. Wind strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. Snow so thick it buried landmarks Boone had known for years. Cold that turned exposed skin black within minutes. Twice he nearly stepped off the trail into ravines he couldn't see until they opened up beneath his boots. But Boone Mercer had survived 6 Wyoming winters alone in these mountains. He knew every tree, every rock formation, every safe path through terrain that killed experienced hunters. The storm was bad, the worst he'd seen in 3 years. It wasn't enough to stop him. When the cabin finally appeared through the white chaos, a dark shape among the pines, smoke barely visible from the chimney, Boone felt something close to relief. Not quite, because relief meant letting your guard down, and the frontier punished that kind of weakness. But close enough. He kicked the door open and carried Evelyn inside, shutting out the storm with his boot heel. The cabin's warmth hit him like a physical thing after hours in the blizzard. His fire had burned down to coals, but enough heat remained to make the single-room space feel almost tropical compared to outside. Boone laid Evelyn on his bed, a simple frame with a straw mattress and wool blankets that smelled like wood smoke and solitude. Her skin had gone from blue to gray, which meant she was past the point where her body could warm itself. He'd seen this before, with Sarah, with Jacob. Knowing what to do didn't make it easier. Boone stripped off Evelyn's wet clothes with clinical efficiency, ignoring the bruises that covered her ribs and arms. Evidence of violence from months ago, maybe. Or more recent cruelty from the town that had just sent her to die in a blizzard. He wrapped her in every dry blanket he owned, then built the fire back up until flames roared against the stone hearth. Still not enough. Advanced hypothermia required more than external heat. The body's core temperature had to be raised, and that meant skin contact. Boone grimaced and stripped down to his long underwear, then climbed under the blankets beside Evelyn. He pulled her against his chest, sharing body heat the way trappers had done for centuries when winter tried to claim them. Her skin felt like ice against his. He held her there, feeding the fire with one hand every 30 minutes, while outside the storm raged against his cabin walls like it resented being denied a victim. Hours passed. Boone didn't sleep. He just held this broken woman and willed her to keep breathing, because if she died after everything he'd done to bring her here, it would mean the frontier had won again. It would mean cruelty always triumphed, and kindness was just another word for failure. Somewhere around midnight, Evelyn's body finally started shivering. That was good. Shivering meant her core temperature was rising, her survival instincts kicking back in. Boone added more wood to the fire and checked her extremities. Her fingers and toes had gone from gray to pink, painful probably, but functional. No frostbite severe enough to require amputation. She'd keep all her pieces. Whether she'd want them after waking up in a stranger's cabin was another question. Around dawn, Evelyn's eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, clearly trying to understand where she was and how she'd gotten there. Then her gaze slid sideways and found Boone sitting in his chair near the fire, fully dressed now, cleaning his rifle. Their eyes met. Evelyn's hand went to her throat, an instinctive protective gesture Boone recognized from women who'd learned not to trust men. "You're safe," he said before she could panic. "You were dying in the snow. I brought you here." She processed that slowly, like her brain was still thawing. "Where is here?" "Raven Hollow, my cabin." "Boone Mercer." It wasn't a question. "Yeah." Evelyn tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain crossed her face, the kind that came from muscles frozen and then warmed too quickly. She fell back against the pillow with a small sound of distress. "Don't move yet," Boone said. "Your body's still recovering. You were hypothermic when I found you. Another hour and you'd be dead." "Maybe that would have been easier." The words came out flat, exhausted. Not self-pity, just statement of fact from someone who'd stopped seeing the point in survival. Boone set down his rifle. "Easier for who?" "Everyone." Evelyn stared at the ceiling. "The town wants me gone. Victor Langley wants me dead. Even the storm agreed with them. The storm doesn't give a damn about you one way or another. It just kills whoever's stupid enough to be outside during it." "I didn't have a choice. They evicted me. Deputy Granger said—" She stopped, probably realizing how pathetic it sounded. "Explaining yourself to someone who'd already saved your life. I know what Granger said." Boone stood and moved to the stove where a pot of broth had been simmering since he'd gotten the fire restarted. "Whole town knows. Mrs. Hawthorne sent her boy up here soon as the storm broke. Told me what happened." Evelyn's eyes widened. "She sent someone to find you?" "Eleanor's got more spine than the rest of Blackthorn Ridge combined." Boone poured broth into a wooden cup and brought it to the bed. "Drink this, slow. Your stomach's been empty too long." She took the cup with shaking hands and sipped carefully. The warmth seemed to travel through her whole body, bringing color back to her face. "Why did you come looking for me?" she asked. Boone settled back into his chair. "Felt like someone needed help." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I got." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the storm had finally exhausted itself. Weak sunlight filtered through gaps in the shutters, turning the falling snow from deadly to almost beautiful. Evelyn finished her broth and set the cup aside. "I can't stay here." "Why not?" "Because—" She gestured vaguely at the cabin, at him, at the impossible situation. "I can't impose on you like this. You don't even know me. I know you survived 7 months with Cutter Hayes' gang. I know the town blamed you for it instead of helping you. I know Wade Granger's been making your life hell, and Victor Langley just tried to murder you with Winter." Boone leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Seems like I know enough." "Victor Langley," Evelyn repeated quietly. "You know about him?" "Know he owns half the territory and probably financed every robbery Hayes ever committed. Yeah." Her head snapped toward him. "How I'm not stupid, and I'm not deaf." Boone stood and added wood to the fire. "Been trapping these mountains for 6 years. You hear things, see things. Men like Langley think they're clever, but they leave tracks just like everyone else." Evelyn pulled the blankets tighter around herself. "He wants something from me. Information about where Hayes hid some bonds. Railroad bonds worth $50,000. You know where they are?" "Not exactly. I heard them talking about it once. Landmarks, but no specific location. A twisted juniper near a red rock formation by a dry creek bed." She laughed bitterly. "Do you know how many places fit that description in the Wyoming Badlands? Couple hundred at least." "Exactly. But Langley thinks I know more than I do. He's squeezing me, trying to force me to remember details I never learned." Boone turned that over in his mind. "And if you can't give him what he wants, then I'm a loose end. I can identify him as the man who financed the gang. I heard his name from Hayes' own mouth. As long as I'm alive, I'm a threat to everything he's built. So he'll kill you." "Eventually." Evelyn's voice stayed calm, like she'd already accepted it. "He just tried to make the storm do it for him. Cleaner that way. No evidence, no questions. Just another person who couldn't survive a Wyoming winter." Boone walked to the window and stared out at the endless white. His cabin sat at nearly 8,000 feet, surrounded by wilderness that stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction. Beautiful and brutal in equal measure. The kind of place that forgave nothing and forgot everyone. He'd chosen it specifically for those qualities after Sarah and Jacob died. Now it was sheltering another person the world wanted to forget. "You can stay here," Boone said without turning around. "Long as you need." "I can't." "Yes, you can." He faced her. "Storm's not done. This was just a break. By tonight it'll be worse than before, and it'll last another week at least. You go back down to that town, Langley will find another way to kill you. Maybe not as poetic as freezing to death, but just as permanent." "Why would you risk that? Helping me makes you his enemy too." "Victor Langley's been my enemy since the day he sat on the town council and voted to quarantine my family instead of helping them." Boone's voice went flat and cold. He just didn't know it until now. Understanding crossed Evelyn's face. "Your wife and son, Sarah and Jacob, they died because men like Langley value property over people, because they'd rather let innocents die than risk their own comfort." He moved back to his chair. "So no, I'm not worried about making him my enemy. That ship sailed 6 years ago." Evelyn studied him for a long moment. "You really mean it? I can stay." "Wouldn't have said it otherwise." "What do you get out of it?" The question caught Boone off guard. He'd expected gratitude, maybe, or suspicion, not this direct interrogation of his motives. "Nothing," he said finally. "Everyone wants something." "Not everyone." Boone met her eyes. "Sometimes people just do things because it's right. Rare as hell on the frontier, but it happens." She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her face, the desperate hope warring with years of learning that trust got you hurt. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, thank you. Don't thank me yet. Winter up here's harder than anything you've survived. We might end up wanting to kill each other before spring." A small smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. "I've survived worse than difficult roommates." Over the next 3 days, the storm returned with a vengeance. Snow piled against the cabin until Boone had to dig tunnels just to reach his woodshed and the smokehouse where he kept winter supplies. Wind screamed through the trees with a sound like tortured animals. The temperature dropped so low that water thrown outside froze before it hit the ground. Inside, Boone and Evelyn established a careful routine. She slept in his bed while he took the floor near the fire. During the day, she helped where she could, mending clothes with supplies he'd accumulated over the years, organizing his chaotic storage, cooking meals that were substantially better than the bland stews he usually made. They didn't talk much at first. Boone wasn't good at conversation after 6 years alone, and Evelyn seemed content with silence. But slowly, gradually, words started filling the spaces between work. "You really lived up here by yourself for 6 years?" she asked one evening while stirring a pot of venison stew. "Mostly." "That sounds lonely." It was. Boone didn't look up from the rabbit pelt he was scraping. "But loneliness is better than being surrounded by people who disgust you." "I used to think that." Evelyn tasted the stew and added more salt. "Now I'm not sure. Loneliness does things to you, makes you forget how to be around people, how to trust them. Maybe that's not a bad thing." "Maybe." She brought him a bowl and settled onto a stool near the fire. "Tell me about your family, if you want." Boone's hands stilled on the pelt. Nobody had asked him that in years. Most people in Blackthorn Ridge knew better. But Evelyn wasn't most people. "Sarah was a teacher," he said slowly, "from Philadelphia, originally. Came west to work at a mission school and decided she hated teaching rich kids who didn't want to learn. So she stayed and married a trapper instead. Sounds like she had good instincts. She did. Smart as hell, stubborn as a mule, and completely fearless about frontier life. Most women from back east took one look at Wyoming and went running. Sarah rolled up her sleeves and started building. And your son? Jacob was 5 when he died. Looked just like his mother. Had her brains too. Kid could read before he could write, and he'd sit for hours looking at books about animals and plants. Boone set down the pelt, his jaw tight. He wanted to be a naturalist. Study wildlife. I was teaching him to track, and he'd make these little notes about everything he saw. Deer movements, bird migrations, weather patterns. Evelyn listened without interrupting, her face soft with sympathy that didn't feel like pity. Fever came through in late spring, Boone continued, started in the south part of the territory and spread north. By the time it hit Blackthorn Ridge, the town was terrified. They set up quarantine zones. Anyone who got sick was isolated. Anyone who'd been near the sick was avoided. Your family got sick. Sarah first, then Jacob a day later. I rode into town begging for the doctor. He refused to come, said it was too dangerous, that he had other patients who weren't already dying. Boone's voice went cold. Victor Langley was on the town council then. He's the one who made the official quarantine order. No one in or out of infected homes. No exceptions. They left you alone to watch them die. Yeah. The word came out like broken glass. I sat there for 8 days, watching my wife burn up with fever while my son cried because he hurt too much to sleep. I tried everything. Cold water, willow bark, prayer. He laughed bitterly. None of it mattered. Sarah died on day 6. Jacob lasted until day 8. And the whole time I could see Blackthorn Ridge from my cabin window. See people going about their lives, shopping, drinking, laughing. While you buried your family. While I buried my family, Boone echoed. Afterward, people came by with food and sympathy, acting like they'd done everything they could, like my wife and son just died from bad luck instead of being abandoned by cowards who valued their own comfort over human decency. Evelyn set down her bowl. That's why you left. That's why I left. Couldn't stand looking at their faces anymore. Couldn't stand pretending we were all civilized people living in a civilized place. So I came up here where at least the wilderness is honest about wanting to kill you. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. I'm sorry, Evelyn said finally. Don't be. It was 6 years ago. I'm over it. You're not. She said it gently, without judgment. And you don't have to be. Some things you don't get over. You just learn to carry them. Boone looked at her then, really looked at her. This woman who'd survived 7 months as a hostage, watched her brother die trying to save her, endured months of public cruelty, and nearly froze to death in a blizzard. She was still here, still standing, still fighting. Maybe that was its own kind of strength. Your brother, Boone said. Thomas. What was he like? Evelyn's face softened. Everything good about people. He was younger than me by 3 years, but he always acted like the protective older sibling. We grew up on a homestead near Laramie. Parents died when I was 19 and Thomas was 16. We kept the place running for 4 years before Hayes found you. Thomas had been investigating connections between ranchers and outlaw gangs. He thought someone with money and influence was financing the robberies. He got too close to the truth. She wrapped her arms around herself. They came at night, set fire to the barn. When we ran out, they were waiting, took us both. Thomas tried to fight, and they beat him unconscious. Why keep you alive? Because Hayes was smart enough to know a hostage was useful, especially a woman. If the law got too close, I was leverage, insurance, plus they needed someone to cook and clean. I became useful. And Thomas? He woke up 3 days later. They let him ride with them, but he was a prisoner same as me. He kept trying to get us both out, planning escapes, looking for opportunities. Her voice broke slightly. Finally found one during a robbery outside Cheyenne. Grabbed me and ran. Made it almost 200 yards before they shot him. I'm sorry. He died getting me free. The posse found me 2 days later, and by then Hayes was dead and the gang was scattered. Everyone called it a rescue. She laughed without humor. But Thomas did the rescuing. He just didn't survive it. Boone understood that weight, the guilt of being the one who lived when someone you loved hadn't. It sat in your chest like a stone, grinding against your ribs every time you breathed. He'd be proud of you, Boone said, surviving what came after. That takes more courage than dying in a blaze of glory. You think so? I know so. Dying's easy. Living when the world wants you dead, that's the hard part. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two people who'd both lost everything and somehow kept breathing anyway, sitting in a cabin while winter tried to murder them and sharing the kind of truth you only told other survivors. On the 5th day, Evelyn found Boone's wife's clothes in a trunk beneath the bed. She didn't mean to. She'd been looking for extra blankets and opened the wrong container. Inside lay carefully folded dresses, a woman's coat, a child's jacket that would have fit a 5-year-old boy. Boone walked in from checking the trapline and found her standing there, holding Sarah's blue calico dress like it might dissolve in her hands. I'm sorry, Evelyn said quickly. I wasn't trying to snoop, It's fine. Boone crossed to the trunk and looked down at its contents. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. Kept meaning to get rid of it, never got around to it. You don't have to get rid of anything. What am I going to do with a dead woman's dresses? Evelyn folded the calico carefully and set it back in the trunk. Keep them. Remember her. You're allowed to do that. I remember her just fine without the dresses. Then keep them anyway. She met his eyes. Not everything has to be useful to be worth keeping. Boone wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe she was right. Maybe holding on to Sarah's things wasn't pathetic. It was just human. A way of saying that the people you loved mattered even after they were gone. You can wear them if you want, he said finally. Better than that torn dress you came in wearing. Evelyn looked surprised. Are you sure? Sarah would have wanted her clothes used. She hated waste. Boone closed the trunk. Pick whatever fits. Consider it payment for making food that doesn't taste like boiled leather. A real smile crossed her face then. Deal. That night, Evelyn appeared in one of Sarah's simpler dresses, a gray wool that fit her reasonably well with a few adjustments. She'd cleaned up using the wash basin and tied her dark hair back with a strip of cloth. She looked almost peaceful. Better? She asked, spinning slightly. Better, Boone agreed. They ate dinner together, and for the first time since Sarah and Jacob died, Boone's cabin felt like a home instead of a tomb. The next morning brought visitors. Boone heard them coming from a mile away, horses struggling through deep snow, men cursing the cold. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, peering through gaps in the shutters. 4 riders. Even at this distance, he recognized the lead horse. Victor Langley had come calling. Get away from the windows, Boone told Evelyn, and load that revolver I showed you where to find. Her face went pale. He's here? He's here, which means this just got complicated. Evelyn disappeared into the back corner of the cabin where Boone's spare weapons hung on pegs. She came back with an old Navy Colt, checking the cylinder with hands that shook only slightly. You know how to use that? Boone asked. Thomas taught me. I'm not a great shot, but I can hit something man-sized at close range. That'll do. Boone positioned himself near the door, rifle ready but not yet aimed. Outside, the riders dismounted in the small clearing in front of the cabin. Langley's voice carried clearly through the wooden walls. Mercer, I know you're in there. I just want to talk. Then talk, Boone called back. Face-to-face would be more civilized. I'm not feeling particularly civilized today. A pause. Then Langley tried a different approach. I'm looking for someone. A woman named Evelyn Cross. Last seen heading into the mountains during the storm. I'm concerned for her safety. Awful concerned for someone you just evicted in a blizzard. That was an unfortunate misunderstanding. I've since learned she'd paid her rent. I came to apologize and offer better accommodations. How generous. Mercer, be reasonable. If the woman's in your cabin, she's trespassing on your hospitality. I can take her off your hands, give you peace and quiet again. Boone glanced back at Evelyn. She stood against the far wall, revolver held in both hands, her face set with the kind of determination that came from knowing this was it. The moment where running stopped working. He turned back to the door. She's not going anywhere. Silence outside. Then Langley's voice changed, losing its false warmth. I'm trying to handle this peacefully. Don't make me resort to other methods. Is that a threat? It's a reality. You're harboring a criminal. That makes you complicit in her crimes. What crimes? Being kidnapped? Surviving? Boone's voice went cold as the air outside. The marshal cleared her of everything. Only crime she's committed is making you nervous. I don't know what she's told you. She told me you financed Cutter Hayes' gang, that you've been using outlaw money to build your empire, that you're willing to kill to keep it quiet. Boone chambered around loud enough for the men outside to hear. And I believe her. Another long silence. When Langley spoke again, the pretense was gone completely. You're making a mistake, Mercer, a very costly one. Won't be my first, probably won't be my last. I have 4 men with me. You're alone in that cabin. Am I? Boone let the question hang. You willing to bet your life on that assumption? He wasn't bluffing, not really. Boone had defended this cabin before, 3 years ago when a group of outlaws tried robbing him. They'd learned the hard way that attacking a man in his own fortress was suicide. Langley knew the story. Everyone in the territory did. This isn't over, the rancher said finally. Didn't expect it to be. The sound of horses being mounted. Hoofbeats moving away through the snow, gradually fading into silence. Boone waited 5 full minutes before lowering his rifle. When he finally turned around, Evelyn was sitting on the floor, back against the wall, still holding the revolver. "He'll come back," she said. "Yeah. With more men. Better planning." "Probably." "You should have let him take me. Now you're in danger too." Boone crossed to where she sat and gently took the revolver from her shaking hands. "I was in danger the moment I carried you out of that storm. Langley's just making it official." "This isn't your fight." "It is now." He offered her his hand and pulled her to her feet. "Besides, I'm tired of men like him deciding who lives and who dies. Someone needs to tell him no. Even if it gets you killed? Especially then." Boone returned the revolver to its peg. "Sarah used to say that how you die matters less than how you live. I've been hiding up here for 6 years, pretending I'm better than the people who abandoned my family. But hiding's just another kind of cowardice." Evelyn stepped closer. "What you're doing isn't cowardice, isn't it? I've got skills, resources, knowledge of these mountains that could help people. And I've been keeping it all to myself because I was too angry and hurt to care about anyone else's suffering." He met her eyes. "You changed that. Watching you fight to survive even when everyone wanted you to give up, it reminded me that some people are worth the risk." She reached out and touched the scar on his face. The gesture was gentle, tentative, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. Boone didn't pull away. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me as a person instead of a problem. Thank you for making me remember I'm still human." They stood there in the firelight, 2 damaged people learning to trust again, while outside the mountains waited and Victor Langley planned his next move. The war for Raven Hollow had begun. Langley returned 4 days later with 8 men instead of 4. Boone spotted them at dawn, dark shapes moving through the pine forest below the cabin. They weren't trying to hide anymore. No pretense of peaceful conversation this time. These were hired guns, the kind of men who did ugly work for good money and slept fine afterward. "How many?" Evelyn asked from her position near the back window. 8 that I can see. Maybe more hanging back." Boone checked his rifle load for the 3rd time. "They're setting up a perimeter. Professional about it too." "Former soldiers?" "Some of them, probably. Langley's not taking chances this time." Evelyn's hands were steady as she loaded the spare rifles Boone had positioned around the cabin. Over the past 4 days, he'd taught her everything he could about defensive shooting. She wasn't an expert marksman, but she'd learned fast and didn't panic under pressure. That counted for more than accuracy when bullets started flying. "We could run," she said quietly. "There's still time. The back trail goes through a narrow pass they've probably already covered, and even if we made it, we'd be on foot in winter with armed men hunting us." Boone shook his head. "No, better to fight from here. I built this cabin to hold against worse than hired thugs. You built it to hold against outlaws and wildlife, not a small army. Same principles apply. Limited approach angles, good sight lines, strong walls." He moved to reinforce the shutters with spare timber. "Besides, running just delays the problem. Langley won't stop until you're dead, or he is. Might as well settle it now." A voice boomed across the clearing, amplified by the morning cold. "Boone Mercer, this is your last chance to resolve this peacefully." Boone recognized the speaker, a thick-necked enforcer named Dutch Keller, who'd done muscle work for various frontier criminals over the years. Dangerous, but not particularly bright. The kind of man who solved problems with violence because thinking hurt too much. "I'm listening," Boone called back. "Send out the woman. Mr. Langley promises she won't be harmed, just wants to ask her some questions." "About the location of $50,000 in stolen bonds?" A pause. "About her time with the Hayes gang, that's all. You're a terrible liar, Dutch. And you're a dead man if you don't surrender her in the next 5 minutes. Evelyn appeared at Boone's shoulder. "Maybe I should go. You've done enough." "Stop." Boone didn't take his eyes off the forest. "You go out there, you're dead within an hour. Langley will torture you until you tell him what he wants to know, then kill you to eliminate the witness. That's not negotiable. But you'll die defending me." "Maybe. Or maybe I'll kill every man stupid enough to attack my home." He glanced at her. "You really think I survived 6 years up here by being easy to kill?" Before she could answer, Dutch's voice came again. "Time's up, Mercer. Send her out or we're coming in." "Then come in," Boone shouted back. "Let's see how that works out for you." The first shot came from the tree line, shattering one of the cabin's side windows. Boone had already moved, pulling Evelyn down behind the thick log walls as more gunfire erupted. Bullets punched through the shutters and thudded into timber that had been chosen specifically for its thickness. "They're trying to pin us down," Boone said over the noise. "Make us keep our heads down while they advance. Don't let them." He rose to the window and fired 3 quick shots into the forest. A scream confirmed at least one hit. Evelyn took position at the opposite window and squeezed off 2 rounds toward muzzle flashes in the trees. "I hit something," she said, surprised. "Good. Do it again." The gunfight settled into a rhythm. Langley's men would fire in volleys, trying to suppress return fire long enough for someone to advance. Boone would wait for the gap between volleys and pick off anyone foolish enough to leave cover. It was brutal mathematics: 8 attackers with limited cover versus 2 defenders with superior position and unlimited ammunition. For the first hour, the math favored Boone. 3 of Langley's men went down with bullet wounds. The others pulled back to reassess, dragging their injured with them. Boone used the lull to reload and redistribute ammunition. "That won't hold them forever," Evelyn said, pressing a cloth against a cut on her cheek from flying splinters. "They'll try something different. I know, Dutch isn't smart, but whoever's advising Langley is. They'll probe for weaknesses, try to flank us or burn us out." "Can they burn us out?" "Cabin's green timber, hard to light. But if they get close enough with enough fuel—" He didn't finish the thought. They both knew what fire meant in a wooden structure with limited exits. "So we can't let them get close." "No, we can't." The attack resumed 20 minutes later with a new tactic. Half of Langley's remaining men kept up suppressing fire, while the others tried to circle around to the cabin's rear. Boone spotted the movement and shifted position, firing through gaps in the back wall he'd specifically left for defensive purposes. One man dropped. Another dove behind a fallen log, pinned down by Boone's accuracy. But the suppressing fire was working. Evelyn couldn't lift her head long enough to aim properly, and Boone was splitting his attention between 2 fronts. Sooner or later, someone would get through. That someone turned out to be Wade Granger. The deputy had been hanging back during the initial assault, probably hoping someone else would catch the bullets. But when Dutch ordered a coordinated rush on the cabin's north side, Granger saw his chance to earn Langley's favor. He sprinted across the clearing while Boone was focused on the men to the rear, made it to the cabin wall, started working on the cellar door that led to the small underground storage space beneath the cabin. Evelyn heard the scraping sound first. "Someone's at the cellar." Boone swore and grabbed the revolver from his belt. "Watch the windows. Anyone gets inside, shoot them." "Where are you going?" "To deal with our uninvited guest." The cellar entrance was a simple wooden hatch that opened into a dirt-floored space where Boone stored root vegetables and cured meat. It also had a second entrance inside the cabin, a trapdoor beneath a rug that could be used for emergency escape, or in this case, intercepting attackers stupid enough to use it as an entry point. Boone threw back the rug and hauled open the trapdoor. Below, he heard Granger grunting with effort, trying to force the exterior hatch. The wood was thick and barred from inside, but determined effort would eventually break it. Boone climbed down into the darkness, letting his eyes adjust. The cellar smelled like earth and preserved food. Weak light filtered through gaps around the exterior hatch where Granger was working. The bar splintered, the hatch burst open. Wade Granger dropped into the cellar with his revolver drawn, breathing hard from exertion and fear. He didn't see Boone in the shadows, didn't notice the trap until it was too late. Boone stepped forward and slammed the butt of his rifle into Granger's wrist. Bone cracked. The deputy's gun fell into the dirt. Before Granger could scream, Boone had him by the throat, lifting him against the cellar wall with one hand. "You just don't learn, do you?" Boone's voice was conversational despite the violence. Granger clawed at the hand, crushing his windpipe, eyes bulging with panic. All those months terrorizing Evelyn, all those threats, all that cruelty. Boone squeezed harder. "And you still thought you were untouchable because of that badge." The deputy's face was turning purple. "Boone!" Evelyn's voice came from above, urgent. "They're rushing the front!" He wanted to finish it, wanted to feel Granger's neck snap under his fingers, wanted justice for every woman this coward had hurt over the years. But Evelyn needed him more. Boone threw Granger against the far wall hard enough to knock him unconscious, then climbed back up through the trapdoor. Above, gunfire had intensified. He could hear men shouting, boots pounding across the clearing. He emerged to find Evelyn firing as fast as she could reload, trying to hold off 3 men who'd made it to the cabin's front wall. They were working on the door with an axe, the blade biting deep into wood with each swing. Boone grabbed his rifle and fired through a gun port he'd built into the front wall. The man with the axe went down screaming, clutching his shattered shoulder. The other 2 scattered, looking for cover that didn't exist this close to the cabin. Boone picked them both off with 2 shots. Silence fell across the clearing. Smoke hung in the cold air. The smell of gunpowder mixed with pine sap and blood. Boone counted bodies, 5 down, 3 still moving but wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. "Is it over?" Evelyn asked, her voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Not yet. Dutch is still out there. And Langley." As if summoned by his name, Victor Langley emerged from the tree line with Dutch Keller beside him. Both men looked furious and desperate in equal measure. Langley held a bundle of dynamite. "Son of a bitch," Boone muttered. "Is that—" "Yeah. Mining explosive. Probably stole it from one of the claims he owns." Boone moved toward the front window. "If he lights that and gets it onto the roof, this cabin becomes kindling. Can you stop him?" "Not from here. Angle's wrong." Boone's mind raced through options, all of them bad. "I have to go out there. That's suicide. Staying in here when that dynamite goes off is also suicide. At least outside I have a chance." He handed Evelyn his rifle. "If I go down, you run. Use the back trail. Don't stop until you reach the marshal's office in Laramie." "Boone, promise me." She grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare die out there." "I'll do my best." He managed a grim smile. "Keep shooting. Make them think we're both still inside." Before she could argue further, Boone slipped out through a side door he'd built specifically for this kind of situation, a narrow opening that couldn't be seen from the front clearing. He circled through the trees, moving with the kind of silent efficiency that came from years of hunting in these mountains. Langley was focused on the cabin, Dutch beside him providing cover. They didn't see Boone until he was 15 feet away with his rifle leveled at Langley's head. "Drop it." Both men spun. Dutch reached for his gun and Boone put a bullet through his knee. The enforcer went down howling, clutching his shattered leg. Langley stood frozen, the bundle of dynamite still in his hands, fuse unlit. "Drop it," Boone repeated, "or I'll drop you. You won't shoot me." Langley's voice tried for confidence. "I'm not some outlaw. I'm a respected businessman. You kill me, the law will hunt you down." "The law?" Boone laughed without humor. "The same law that let Wade Granger terrorize women for years? The same law that turns a blind eye while you finance robbery and murder?" He took a step closer. "I'm done caring about the law. Only thing I care about is making sure you never hurt anyone again. I can pay you." Desperation crept into Langley's voice. "Whatever you want. Name your price." "I want my wife and son back. Can you do that?" Langley's face went pale. "That was years ago. That wasn't personal. It was personal to me." Boone's finger tightened on the trigger. "You sat on that council and voted to let them die. You valued your own safety over their lives, just like you value those stolen bonds over Evelyn's life now. She knows where they are. $50,000 that belong to me. They belong to the railroad you stole them from. And she doesn't know where they are. She told you that. But you couldn't accept it because accepting it would mean you tortured and killed an innocent woman for nothing." Movement in the trees behind Langley. Boone's eyes flicked up for just a second, long enough to see a rifle barrel emerging from cover. Another of Langley's men. One who'd circled around during the chaos. Time slowed. Boone could shoot Langley or dive for cover. Not both. And if he dove, Langley would light that dynamite and destroy the cabin with Evelyn inside. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Boone pulled his trigger. Langley's head snapped back, the dynamite falling from his dead hands. The hidden rifle fired. Pain exploded through Boone's shoulder as the bullet tore through muscle and bone. The impact spun him sideways, and he hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from his lungs. His rifle fell from nerveless fingers. The world tilted, went gray at the edges. Through the haze, Boone saw the remaining gunmen step out from cover, leveling his rifle for a finishing shot. Then Evelyn was there. She must have heard the gunfire and come running, Must have seen Boone go down. Must have decided that following orders about running away could wait until after she saved his life. She fired the revolver Boone had taught her to use. Once, twice, 3 times. The gunman staggered, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Evelyn ran to Boone and dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressed against his shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. Her face was white with fear. "Stay with me," she said. "Don't you dare die now." Boone tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. Blood soaked through his shirt, hot against his skin. His vision was narrowing to a tunnel with Evelyn's terrified face at the end of it. "I need to get you inside," she was saying. "Need to stop the bleeding. Boone, can you hear me?" He could hear her, could feel her hands on him, desperate and gentle at the same time. Could see tears running down her face as she tried to lift him. Too heavy. He was too heavy, and she was too small, and the blood just kept coming. Darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. The last thing Boone saw before unconsciousness took him was Evelyn's face, and the last thing he thought was that if he died here, at least it was while protecting someone who deserved protecting. Then the world went black. He woke to firelight and agony. His shoulder felt like someone had shoved a red-hot poker through it and left it there. Every breath sent fresh waves of pain radiating down his arm and across his chest. He tried to move and instantly regretted it. "Don't." Evelyn's hand pressed gently against his good shoulder. "The bullet went clean through, but you lost a lot of blood. You need to stay still." Boone's eyes focused slowly. He was in his bed, bandages wrapped tight around his shoulder and upper chest. The cabin smelled like smoke and blood, and the herbs Evelyn must have used to clean the wound. "How long?" His voice came out as a rasp. 6 hours, maybe 7. The sun's going down." She held a cup of water to his lips. "Drink, slowly." The water helped. Boone managed to swallow a few mouthfuls before speaking again. "Langley, dead. You shot him. There were 8 men total, 5 dead, 3 wounded too badly to run. They dragged themselves back down the mountain about 2 hours ago." "And Granger?" "Unconscious in the cellar last I checked. I locked the hatch. Figured we'd decide what to do with him when you woke up." She set down the water cup. "If you woke up, you scared the hell out of me." "Sorry." "Don't apologize. You saved my life." Again. Her hand found his, squeezed gently. "I thought I was going to watch you die out there. Not that easy to kill." "Apparently not, though you gave it your best effort." She tried to smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The bleeding stopped, but the wound needs real medical attention. A doctor, proper supplies. Things I don't have up here. No doctors on this mountain. Closest one's in Blackthorn Ridge, and he won't come." Boone shifted, testing his range of motion. Limited, but functional. "I've survived worse." "When?" 3 years ago. Took an arrow through the thigh during a dispute with some Shoshone hunters who thought I was poaching on their land. Pulled it out myself and cauterized it with a hot knife." Evelyn's face went a shade paler. "That's horrifying. That's frontier medicine. If it doesn't kill you in the first day, you'll probably live." He tried to sit up and made it about halfway before the pain forced him back down. "Help me up. Need to check the perimeter. You need to rest." "Can't rest until I know we're secure. Those 3 wounded men, they might come back. Or send word to whoever Langley has in town. We're not safe yet." She wanted to argue. He could see it in her face. But she also knew he was right. Together, they got Boone upright and over to the chair near the fire. Every movement sent fresh agony through his shoulder, but he gritted his teeth and pushed through it. Pain was just information. It told you that you were damaged, but it didn't tell you to quit. Outside the windows, full dark had fallen. Snow had started again, covering the blood and bodies with a fresh white blanket. Nature's way of cleaning up after human violence. "We should check on Granger," Boone said. "See if he's awake." They descended into the cellar together, Evelyn going first with the lantern, while Boone followed more slowly. The deputy was conscious, curled in the corner with his broken wrist cradled against his chest. His eyes went wide when he saw them. "Don't kill me," he said immediately. "Please, I was just following orders." "Orders to terrorize and assault women?" Evelyn's voice was cold. "Those orders? Langley paid me. Said you were dangerous, that you'd been part of the gang. And you believed him because it gave you an excuse to be cruel. She stepped closer. How many other women have you hurt, Deputy? How many people has that badge protected you from consequences? Granger looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Take him up, Boone said. I got questions for him. They hauled Granger up into the main cabin and shoved him into a chair. Boone stood over him despite the pain it caused, making his presence felt. Victor Langley's dead, Boone said flatly. His men are scattered. You're the only one left who knows what happened here. I won't tell anyone, I swear. Just let me go. Cook. You'll tell everyone. That's exactly what you're going to do. Boone leaned closer. You're going to ride back to Blackthorn Ridge and tell them that Victor Langley tried to murder Evelyn Cross to cover up his criminal activities. You're going to tell them he financed Cutter Hayes' gang. You're going to tell them everything. They won't believe me. They will when you show them this. Evelyn pulled a folded paper from her pocket. I found it in Langley's coat. It's a ledger page. Shows payments to Hayes with dates that match known robberies. Granger stared at the document like it was a snake. Here's what's going to happen, Boone continued. You're going to take that evidence to Marshal Kane in Laramie. You're going to confess to your part in harassing Miss Cross. And you're going to resign as deputy effective immediately. And if I don't, then I'll hunt you down and finish what I started in this cellar. Your choice. The deputy's face went through several expressions. Fear, anger, calculation, resignation. Finally, he nodded. I'll do it. I'll tell them everything. Smart man. Boone pulled him to his feet. There's a horse outside that survived the fight. Take it and get out of my mountains. If I ever see you again, I'll assume you're here to kill me and act accordingly. They watched from the doorway as Granger mounted the horse and rode off into the darkness, holding his broken wrist and looking back only once before disappearing into the trees. You think he'll actually do it? Evelyn asked. Maybe. Fear's a powerful motivator, and he knows I meant what I said about hunting him down. Boone closed the door and barred it. Either way, word's going to spread. Langley's dead. His men are scattered. The truth about the robberies is going to come out. What about the bonds? Langley's people will still want them. Let them want. You don't know where they are, and without Langley orchestrating things, his organization will fall apart. Greed makes terrible glue. He made his way back to the chair, exhaustion and blood loss catching up with him. We just need to survive until spring. Then we figure out what comes next. Evelyn helped him sit, then knelt beside the chair. Her hand rested on his uninjured arm. Thank you, she said softly. For everything. For saving my life, for believing me, for fighting when you could have just sent me away. Couldn't do that? Why not? Boone looked at her, this woman who'd survived so much, who'd proven herself brave and capable when the world tried to break her. This woman who'd brought something back into his life he'd thought was dead forever. Hope. Because you reminded me that some things are worth fighting for, he said, and because somewhere along the way protecting you stopped being charity and started being... He trailed off, not sure how to finish. Evelyn finished for him. Started being personal. Yeah. She leaned forward and kissed his scarred cheek, gentle as snowfall. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears that weren't quite sadness. Get some rest, she said. I'll keep watch tonight. Tomorrow we'll clean up the mess and figure out how to explain all this to the authorities. Tomorrow, Boone agreed. But as he drifted toward sleep, Boone knew that explaining wouldn't be the hard part. The hard part would be figuring out what he and Evelyn meant to each other now that the crisis had passed. Whether the bond forged in survival could exist in peacetime. Whether two broken people could build something whole. Those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight, they were alive, they were safe, and they were together. For now, that was enough. The marshal arrived 3 days later with a federal posse and a warrant that turned out to be unnecessary. Boone heard them coming from a mile out, too many horses moving too carefully to be anything but law enforcement. He was sitting on the porch despite Evelyn's protests, his shoulders still screaming with every movement, rifle across his lap, more from habit than actual preparedness. That's a lot of riders, Evelyn said from the doorway behind him. Federal marshal. Maybe 6 deputies. Boone didn't move. Probably here because Granger actually kept his word. Or because someone in town noticed Langley didn't come back. Should we be worried? Depends on whether they're here to arrest us or help us. The riders emerged from the tree line in formation. Professional, cautious, weapons ready but not drawn. Leading them was a man Boone recognized even at this distance. U.S. Marshal Elias Kane, maybe 50 years old, with the kind of weathered face that came from 30 years of chasing bad men through bad country. He'd been the one who brought down Cutter Hayes' gang, the one who'd cleared Evelyn's name the first time. Kane raised his hand, and the posse stopped at the edge of the clearing. His eyes swept across the carnage that 3 days of snow hadn't quite covered. Blood stains still visible on the cabin walls, disturbed earth where bodies had fallen, bullet holes in every visible surface. "Boone Mercer," Kane called out. "Permission to approach?" "Granted, but your men stay put. And stay." The marshal dismounted and walked forward alone, hands visible and empty. He stopped at the base of the porch steps and looked up at Boone with the kind of expression that gave nothing away. "You look like hell," Kane observed. "Got shot. Tends to have that effect." "Victor Langley's dead. You know anything about that?" "I know everything about it. I killed him." Boone met the marshal's eyes without flinching. "Self-defense. He came here with 8 hired guns trying to murder me and Miss Cross. We defended ourselves. You want to arrest me for it? Go ahead and try." Kane's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Stand down, Mercer. I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here because Wade Granger rode into Laramie 2 days ago babbling about murder and conspiracy and Victor Langley financing outlaw gangs." He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Brought this with him, ledger page showing payments to Cutter Hayes. That's Evelyn's doing. She found it on Langley's body." "Smart woman." Kane's gaze shifted to where Evelyn stood in the doorway. "Miss Cross, good to see you alive. Town gossip had you dead in the blizzard." "Town gossip wanted me dead in the blizzard," Evelyn corrected. "Victor Langley made it happen. Boone stopped it. So I'm hearing. Mind if I come inside? Long ride up here, and I'd like to hear the full story before my ass freezes to this saddle." Boone stood carefully, using the rifle as a crutch. "Come on then, but tell your men not to get comfortable. This isn't a social call." They settled around the cabin's small table, Boone, Evelyn, and Marshal Kane. One of the deputies brought in saddlebags containing official documents and what looked like evidence collected from Langley's ranch. Kane spread it across the table with the methodical care of a man who'd built 1,000 cases. "Here's what I know," the marshal began. "Victor Langley owned the largest ranch in the territory. Respected businessman. Political connections in Cheyenne and Washington. On paper, he was everything frontier society wants: successful, civilized, legitimate." "On paper," Boone said. "On paper. Reality was different. We've been investigating him for 8 months, ever since the Hayes gang went down. Something about their operation felt too organized, too well-informed. They knew train schedules, payroll routes, security details, information that required inside access." Evelyn leaned forward. "My brother suspected the same thing. That's why they killed him. Thomas Cross." "Yeah, I remember him. Good man, good investigator." Kane pulled out another document. "After you were rescued, Miss Cross, I started looking deeper into Langley's finances. Took months to untangle, but eventually I found irregular payments, large sums moving through shell companies and false names, money coming in from sources that didn't match his ranch income. Stolen money," Boone said. "Stolen money being laundered into legitimate assets. Langley would finance a robbery, take a percentage of the haul, clean it through his various businesses, and use it to expand his empire. He got rich on other people's crimes while maintaining the appearance of respectability." "And nobody questioned it? Why would they? Rich men get richer. That's how the world works. Unless you're looking for the pattern, it just looks like success." Kane tapped the ledger page. "This is the first direct evidence linking him to Hayes. With this and Granger's testimony, I can prove conspiracy, financing criminal activity, and accessory to murder on at least 12 counts." "Could have," Evelyn said quietly. "You could have proven it, but Langley's dead now." "Yes, he is. Which brings me to the interesting part." Kane pulled out a notebook and flipped it open. "Wade Granger claims Langley attacked this cabin with 8 armed men. Claims you defended yourselves. Claims Langley was trying to kill Miss Cross to prevent her from revealing his crimes. That all accurate?" "Every word," Boone said. "Granger also claims you showed considerable restraint. Says you could have killed him in the cellar, but didn't. Just broke his wrist and sent him packing with evidence and orders to confess." Kane looked up. "That true too?" Seem more useful alive than dead. Practical. The marshal made a note. I went through Langley's ranch house after Granger's confession. Found more ledgers, correspondence with known criminals, maps marked with robbery locations. Enough evidence to hang him 3 times over if he wasn't already dead. So it's finished, Evelyn said. Langley's organization is exposed. Not quite. Langley had partners, silent investors who helped finance his operations in exchange for percentages. I've identified at least 4 so far: ranchers, businessmen, even a banker in Cheyenne. They're scrambling now, trying to distance themselves from a dead man's crimes. But they'll face justice eventually. Boone shifted in his chair, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his shoulder. What about the bonds? The railroad bonds Hayes stole. Langley's people will still want them. Kane's expression sharpened. What do you know about those bonds? Just what Evelyn told me. $50,000 in bearer bonds buried somewhere in the Badlands. Langley was trying to force her to reveal the location. And can you, Miss Cross, reveal the location? Evelyn shook her head. I heard Hayes and his lieutenant talking about it once. They mentioned landmarks, but nothing specific enough to find. A twisted juniper near red rocks by a dry creek. That could be anywhere. It could be, Kane agreed. Or it could be very specific if you know the right area. He pulled out a map and spread it across the table. Hayes operated primarily in this region, between Laramie and Rawlins. If we narrow the search to that corridor and look for geological features matching your description, his finger traced a route through the Badlands, stopping at a particular spot marked with a small X. There. Red Hollow. Named for the iron oxide in the rock formations, has a seasonal creek that runs dry by midsummer. And I happen to know there's a juniper tree twisted into a double spiral by wind patterns, right at the mouth of a small canyon. Evelyn stared at the map. You already knew where they were. I suspected, had geological surveys done of Hayes's known territory. Red Hollow matched multiple criteria. But I couldn't justify a full excavation based on suspicion. Now, with your testimony confirming those specific landmarks, I can get a federal warrant to search the area. And if you find the bonds? They go back to the railroad they were stolen from. Justice served, case closed. Kane folded the map. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Boone felt tension settle across his shoulders. Here it comes. I need you both to testify. Federal trial. We're going after Langley's partners and everyone connected to his criminal enterprise. Your testimony, especially yours, Miss Cross, will be crucial to convicting them. No. The word came out flat and final. Kane's eyebrows rose. No? She's testified enough, given enough. The law cleared her once, and the town still treated her like a criminal. Now you want her to relive everything again in front of a courtroom full of men who'll question every word she says? Boone leaned forward despite the pain. Find another way. There is no other way. She's the only living witness to Hayes discussing Langley's involvement. Without her testimony, the partners walk free. Then they walk free. Boone. Evelyn's hand touched his arm. It's okay. If testifying puts these men in prison, I'll do it. You don't owe the law anything. No, but I owe it to Thomas. He died investigating this. The least I can do is finish what he started. Kane watched the exchange with the careful attention of a man who read people for a living. Miss Cross, I can't promise the trial will be easy. Defense lawyers will attack your character, question your memory, suggest you were complicit with the gang rather than their prisoner. It'll be ugly. Uglier than being evicted into a blizzard to die? Uglier than watching my brother get shot trying to save me? Evelyn's voice stayed steady. I can handle ugly, Marshal. I've been handling it for months. I don't doubt that. Kane's expression softened slightly. But you should know, there's talk in Blackthorn Ridge, about you and Mercer, about what happened up here. What kind of talk? Boone's tone went dangerous. The kind that happens when a man and woman spend weeks alone together. Especially when that woman has a reputation the town already questions. Kane held up his hand. I'm not judging, I'm warning. Defense lawyers will use anything they can to discredit her testimony, including implications about improper behavior. Improper behavior? Boone's laugh had no humor in it. I saved her life multiple times. We survived a siege together. Where's the impropriety in that? In the minds of people looking for reasons to dismiss uncomfortable truths? Everywhere. The marshal gathered his documents. I'm just saying, be prepared. The trial won't just examine Langley's crimes. It'll examine both of you. Evelyn stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to both men. Boone could see tension in her shoulders, the way her hands gripped the windowsill. When's the trial? She asked, without turning. 3 months? Maybe 4? Federal court in Cheyenne? I'll send word when the date's set. Kane stood. In the meantime, I'd suggest you both stay visible. Town activities. Church, if you're inclined. Anything that demonstrates respectability and counters the gossip. I haven't been to town in 6 years, Boone said. Might be time to change that. Public opinion matters in trials. Juries are human. They're influenced by what they hear outside the courtroom. Kane moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Mercer, you did the right thing. Defending her. Standing up to Langley. This territory needs more men willing to do that. This territory needs better laws that don't require men like me to enforce them. Won't get any argument there. Kane opened the door, letting in a blast of cold air. I'll be in touch. Try not to shoot anyone else before the trial. No promises. The marshal smiled, actually smiled, and walked out. Moments later, the sound of horses moving away filtered through the cabin walls, gradually fading into silence. Boone and Evelyn sat in that silence for a long time. Finally, Evelyn spoke. He's right. About the trial. They'll tear me apart. Let them try. They'll question everything. My time with the gang, my relationship with Thomas, why I survived when he didn't. And now they'll question this, us, whatever this is. Boone pushed himself upright and crossed to where she stood. His shoulder protested every step, but he ignored it. You know what you are? He said. You're the strongest person I've met on this entire frontier. You survived things that would break most men. You kept your humanity when the world tried to strip it away. And you're standing here right now, alive and whole, and willing to fight for justice even though it costs you. He turned her to face him. Whatever those lawyers say, whatever that courtroom thinks, they can't change the truth. And the truth is, you're innocent of everything except surviving. Tears slid down her face. You really believe that? With everything I am. She leaned into him, careful of his injured shoulder, and Boone wrapped his good arm around her. They stood like that while outside the winter sun broke through clouds and turned the snow-covered clearing into something almost beautiful. Over the next 2 weeks, Boone's shoulder healed enough for basic function. The wound still hurt like hell, and he'd lost some range of motion, but he could chop wood and check trap lines without passing out from pain. Progress. During that time, he and Evelyn fell into a new rhythm. Less defensive, more domestic. She cooked while he repaired damage from the siege. She read aloud from the book Sarah had left behind while he cleaned weapons by firelight. Small moments that felt almost normal, if you ignored the bullet holes in the walls and the bodies they'd buried in shallow graves once the ground thawed enough to dig. They talked more now. Real conversations that went beyond survival logistics. One night, Evelyn asked the question Boone had been waiting for. What happens after the trial? He was sharpening his hunting knife, the rhythmic scrape of stone on steel filling the silence before he answered. What do you want to happen? I don't know. I've spent so long just trying to survive the next day that I haven't thought about the future. She set down the shirt she was mending. I can't go back to Blackthorn Ridge. Even if the trial vindicates me completely, that town will never accept me. Too many people invested too much in my guilt. So don't go back. Where else is there? I have no money, no family, no prospects. The only skill I have is surviving, and that's not exactly marketable. Boone set down the knife. You could stay here. The words hung in the air between them. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. Stay here? In this cabin? With you? Why not? You've been here almost a month already. We work well together. You can shoot, cook, handle yourself in a crisis. Those are useful skills in the high country. That's very practical reasoning for asking a woman to live with you. What other kind of reasoning should there be? She laughed, but it had an edge. Most men would at least pretend there's affection involved. Boone realized he'd stepped into territory he had no map for. Survival, he understood. Combat made sense, but whatever was happening between him and Evelyn, that was wilderness of a different kind. There is affection, he said carefully. I just don't have the words for it. Haven't needed them in 6 years. Try anyway. He stood and crossed to where she sat, then lowered himself into the chair opposite her. His shoulder twinged, but he pushed through it. I spent 6 years angry at the world, angry at the town for abandoning Sarah and Jacob, angry at myself for not being able to save them, angry at every person who kept living when they didn't. Boone met her eyes. Then you showed up, half dead, in a snowdrift, and something changed. At first I told myself it was just basic human decency. Help someone who needs it, but it was more than that. What was it? Recognition. You'd survived something that should have destroyed you, lost someone you loved, been betrayed by people who should have protected you. You carried the same weight I did, but you hadn't let it turn you into what I'd become, bitter and alone and half convinced the world deserved to burn. Evelyn's hand found his across the table. You reminded me that survival alone isn't enough, Boone continued, that staying human matters, that protecting someone isn't weakness, it's the point. And somewhere in the middle of all the violence and chaos, I realized I didn't want you to leave. Not because you're useful, though you are, because when you're here, this cabin feels like a home instead of a tomb. She was crying now, quiet tears that didn't match the smile on her face. That's the worst love confession I've ever heard, she said. It's not a love confession. It's a... He stopped. Wait, is it? You tell me. Do you love me, Boone Mercer? The question should have terrified him. For 6 years, love had meant pain and loss and grief so deep it had driven him into the mountains to escape humanity. The smart thing would be to say no, to maintain distance, to protect himself from ever hurting like that again. But Evelyn had taught him that smart wasn't always right. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I do. Her smile widened. That's still the worst confession ever, but I'll take it. What about you? What about me? Do you love me? Or are you just grateful I didn't let you freeze to death? Evelyn stood and moved around the table. She sat on the arm of his chair, careful not to jostle his injured shoulder, and touched the scar on his face with gentle fingers. I loved you the moment you stepped between me and Wade Granger in that store. Before you even spoke. Before you did anything except refuse to let a coward hurt someone weaker than himself. Her hand slid down to rest against his chest. Everything since then has just made me more certain. Boone pulled her closer, awkwardly, because his shoulder protested and neither of them was particularly good at this kind of intimacy. Their first kiss was clumsy and unpracticed and tasted like wood smoke and coffee and 6 years of loneliness finally ending. When they broke apart, Evelyn was laughing. What? Boone asked. Nothing, just the timing. We're about to face a federal trial that'll drag both our names through mud, and we choose now to figure out we love each other. Timing's always been terrible on the frontier. Might as well embrace it. She kissed him again, less clumsy this time, and Boone decided that maybe some kinds of wilderness were worth exploring. 2 months later, spring arrived in earnest. Snow melted into rushing streams. Wildflowers emerged from the thawed ground. Elk returned to the high meadows, and Boone's traplines filled with beaver and marten preparing for warmer weather. He and Evelyn had rebuilt the cabin's damaged sections, turning battle scars into stronger construction. They'd also made the trip down to Blackthorn Ridge 3 times, carefully, together, armed and alert, to show themselves publicly and counter whatever gossip was circulating. The town's reaction had been mixed. Some people avoided them entirely, uncomfortable with reminders of their own cruelty toward Evelyn. Others offered cautious apologies and what passed for frontier sympathy. A few, Eleanor Hawthorne prominent among them, welcomed them openly and spread the truth about Langley's crimes to anyone who'd listen. Wade Granger was gone, fled to parts unknown after resigning in disgrace. Several of Langley's closest associates had also disappeared, either running from federal warrants or preparing their own defenses. The trial date arrived in early May. Marshal Kane sent word by courier, federal court in Cheyenne, proceedings to begin May 12th. Testimony expected to last 2 weeks. Evelyn was listed as the prosecution's primary witness. Boone was listed as corroborating witness and, somewhat awkwardly, as defendant in a separate inquest into the deaths at Raven Hollow. They want to investigate whether I was justified shooting Langley, Boone said, reading the notice. Standard procedure for civilian killings, even in self-defense. Will there be charges? Kane doesn't think so. Physical evidence supports our account, but I'll have to testify about what happened. Evelyn folded her hands in her lap. We should leave tomorrow. Give ourselves time to get there and prepare. You ready for this? No, but I'll do it anyway. That's how this works, right? You do the hard thing because it needs doing, not because you're ready. Boone crossed to where she sat and pulled her to her feet. Whatever happens in that courtroom, we get through it together. And when it's over, we come back here and keep building. Building what? Whatever we want. A life. A home. A future that isn't defined by what we survived. He kissed her forehead. Something good. She held him tightly, her face pressed against his chest where the steady beat of his heart was probably the most reassuring sound in the world. Something good, she echoed. I like the sound of that. They packed light for the journey to Cheyenne. Spare clothes, weapons, enough supplies for 2 weeks in town. Boone locked the cabin and covered the windows, protecting what they'd built from weather and wildlife during their absence. As they rode down the mountain trail toward the valley below, Boone looked back once at Raven Hollow. The cabin sat among the pines like it had always been there, solid and permanent despite everything that had tried to destroy it. Not unlike the two people who now called it home. The trial would be brutal. The questions invasive. The judgment harsh and public and designed to break anyone with something to hide. But Boone and Evelyn had nothing to hide. Only the truth, ugly and violent and painful, but theirs. And truth, Boone had learned, was the only foundation strong enough to build a future on. They rode toward Cheyenne together, toward justice and judgment and whatever came after. Two survivors who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and chosen to face everything else together. The war for Raven Hollow was over. The fight for their future was just beginning. The federal courthouse in Cheyenne looked like it had been designed to intimidate anyone who walked through its doors. 3 stories of gray stone and tall windows, with columns at the entrance that made Boone think of pictures he'd seen of ancient temples, the kind of building that announced the law's authority before you even stepped inside. Evelyn stopped on the bottom step, staring up at those columns. Second thoughts? Boone asked. About 100 of them. She adjusted the bonnet Mrs. Hawthorne had insisted she borrow, something about looking respectable for the judge. But we're here now. We can still leave. Get on those horses and ride back to Raven Hollow. Let the law handle itself. You know we can't do that. I know, but I'm offering anyway. She took his hand, squeezed once, and started climbing the steps. Boone followed, his shoulders still tight from the long ride but functional enough. They'd been in Cheyenne for 2 days now, staying at a boarding house near the edge of town, preparing for this moment. Inside, the courthouse was all polished wood and echoing voices. People filled the hallways, lawyers in expensive suits, witnesses clutching documents, spectators hoping for entertainment disguised as justice. The air smelled like paper and furniture polish, and the particular sweat that came from nervous people in uncomfortable clothes. Marshal Kane found them near the main courtroom. "You made it," he said, looking relieved. "I was starting to worry." "We said we'd be here," Boone replied. "People say a lot of things. Fewer actually follow through." Kane gestured toward a smaller room off the main hall. "Come on, prosecution wants to brief you before proceedings start." The prosecutor was a thin man named Harrison Webb, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He shook hands like he was assessing your character through your grip strength. "Miss Cross, Mr. Mercer, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." Webb gestured to chairs around a scarred wooden table. "Let's go over what to expect." For the next hour, he walked them through the trial structure, opening arguments, witness testimony, cross-examination. The defense's likely strategy, which apparently involved destroying Evelyn's credibility by any means necessary. "They'll suggest you were complicit with the gang," Webb said bluntly. "That you enjoyed the outlaw lifestyle, that your brother was a criminal and you helped him, that you're lying now to cover your own crimes." Evelyn's face had gone pale, but her voice stayed steady. "And how do I respond to that?" "With the truth, every time. No matter how ugly the questions get, you tell exactly what happened. Don't embellish, don't minimize. Just facts." Webb pulled out a thick folder. "We have evidence supporting your account. Medical reports from when the marshal's posse found you, testimony from the doctor who examined you, statements from gang members who survived, confirming you were a hostage. Will that be enough? Honestly, I don't know. Juries are unpredictable. They hear what they want to hear, but if you're consistent and credible, we have a strong case." Boone leaned forward. What about the men on trial? Langley's partners. What are they facing? Conspiracy to commit robbery, accessory to murder, fraud, and about a dozen other charges. If convicted, they're looking at 20 years minimum. Some might hang. Webb's expression hardened. These men used their wealth and position to finance violence across this territory. They got rich while people died. They deserve everything coming to them. Assuming the jury convicts, Boone said. Assuming that, yes. The trial began at 10 o'clock sharp. Judge Marcus Thornton presided. A gray-haired man in his 60s with a face that suggested he'd seen every variety of human weakness and wasn't impressed by any of it. He called the court to order with a gavel that sounded like a gunshot in the crowded room. Boone and Evelyn sat in the front row behind the prosecution table. Around them, the gallery was packed with spectators. Some were legitimate, journalists, concerned citizens, legal observers. Others were just hungry for drama, treating the trial like theater. The defendants sat at the defense table looking prosperous and offended. 4 men in expensive suits, clean-shaven and respectable, projecting wounded innocence. Boone recognized 2 of them, ranchers who'd attended town meetings in Blackthorn Ridge, who'd shaken hands with widows and orphans while secretly financing the gangs that created them. Webb stood for opening arguments. Gentlemen of the jury, this case is about greed disguised as respectability, about men who use their positions of trust to profit from crime while hiding behind the law they were supposed to uphold. He paced in front of the jury box, his voice carrying clearly. The prosecution will prove that these 4 defendants knowingly financed criminal enterprises, that they provided information enabling robberies, that they laundered stolen money through legitimate businesses, and that when their conspiracy was threatened with exposure, they attempted murder to silence the only witness who could identify them. Mbinde. He gestured toward Evelyn. Miss Evelyn Cross will testify about what she witnessed during her captivity with the Hayes gang. She will describe conversations between gang members and their benefactors. She will provide details only someone present could know. And her testimony, combined with documentary evidence and expert analysis, will prove beyond reasonable doubt that these men are guilty of every charge. Webb sat down. The defense attorney stood, a silver-haired man named Caldwell, who probably charged more per hour than most frontier families earned in a month. His opening was smooth, practiced, designed to plant doubt before any testimony began. Gentlemen of the jury, you will hear many accusations during this trial. Accusations based on the word of a traumatized woman whose credibility is, shall we say, questionable. A woman who admits to living among outlaws for 7 months, who was found in their camp, using their supplies, cooking their meals, who claims to have been an unwilling captive but offers no evidence of attempted escape. He let that sink in, watching the jury's faces. The prosecution wants you to believe that these respectable businessmen, men who have contributed to this territory's growth and prosperity, were secretly criminal masterminds. But where's the proof? Where are the direct communications? The witnesses who can confirm meetings or payments? The prosecution has ledgers that could mean anything. Testimony from a woman whose own brother was part of the gang she now condemns. Speculation and inference presented as fact. Caldwell walked toward the jury, his voice dropping to something almost confidential. I ask only that you remember the standard of proof required in a criminal trial. Beyond reasonable doubt. Not beyond any doubt, but beyond reasonable doubt. And I submit that after hearing all the evidence, you will find that reasonable doubt exists in abundance. These men are innocent. The prosecution's case is built on sand, and justice demands acquittal. He sat down looking satisfied. Judge Thornton called for the prosecution's first witness. Harrison Webb stood. The United States calls Miss Evelyn Cross. The walk from her seat to the witness stand felt like miles. Evelyn's hands were shaking slightly as she placed them on the Bible for swearing in, but her voice came out clear and strong when she took the oath. Webb approached slowly, giving her time to settle. Miss Cross, would you please tell the court where you were on the evening of March 15th, 1884? I was at the homestead I shared with my brother Thomas outside Laramie. And what happened that evening? Evelyn took a breath. Men came. They set fire to our barn. When Thomas and I ran outside, they were waiting. They took us both. Who were these men? Cutter Hayes's gang, outlaws. They'd been robbing trains and stages across Wyoming Territory. Why did they take you? Thomas had been investigating connections between wealthy ranchers and outlaw gangs. He'd gotten close to something they wanted hidden. So they took him to stop the investigation, and they took me because, her voice caught slightly, because I was useful, as insurance, as a hostage. Webb's questions continued methodically, walking Evelyn through 7 months of captivity. The beatings when she resisted. The constant fear. Thomas's attempts to escape and his death during one of those attempts. Her rescue by Marshal Kane's posse. The courtroom was silent except for her voice. Then Webb reached the crucial testimony. Miss Cross, during your time with the gang, did you ever hear them discuss their benefactors? People who helped finance their activities? Yes. Several times. Can you describe one such conversation? Evelyn's hands gripped the witness stand edge. It was about 2 months after they took us. Hayes and his lieutenant, a man named Rake, were drinking. They thought I was asleep, but I was listening. Hayes said the rich man wanted information about the next railroad payroll shipment. Rake asked which rich man, and Hayes said the one in Blackthorn Ridge, the one who'd been funding them since the beginning. Did Hayes mention this man's name? Yes. Victor Langley. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Judge Thornton's gavel cracked once, demanding silence. What else did you hear? Webb asked. Hayes said Langley was getting nervous, that he wanted bigger scores and faster returns. He mentioned other names too, partners who were also investing in the robberies. He said they'd formed a kind of syndicate, rich men financing outlaws and splitting the profits. Did he mention the names of these other partners? Some of them, not all. Evelyn pointed toward the defense table. He mentioned Richard Stanton, said Stanton owned the bank in Cheyenne and was helping launder the money. And he mentioned Henry Carlisle, said he owned half the cattle in the territory and wanted to expand using stolen capital. 2 of the defendants, Stanton and Carlisle, had gone very still. Webb continued questioning for another hour, extracting every detail Evelyn could remember. Names, dates, amounts discussed, methods described. By the time he finished, he'd built a comprehensive picture of conspiracy that matched the documentary evidence perfectly. No further questions, Webb said. Judge Thornton looked at the defense table. Cross-examination? Caldwell stood slowly, buttoning his suit jacket like a man preparing for surgery. Miss Cross, you testified that you were held against your will for 7 months. Is that correct? Yes. During those 7 months, did you attempt to escape? My brother tried several times. I helped him plan. But you, personally, never attempted escape on your own? Evelyn's jaw tightened. No, because they threatened to kill Thomas if I ran, and because I had nowhere to go. We were constantly moving through wilderness. I would have died alone out there. Or perhaps you stayed because you were comfortable, because you'd found a place among these men. No, I stayed because I had no choice. No choice, Caldwell paced. Let me ask you this. During your captivity, did the gang ever assault you, physically or sexually? The question landed like a slap. Evelyn's face flushed. Objection, Webb was on his feet. Relevance? The witness claims she was held prisoner under threat of violence. I'm establishing what kind of treatment she actually received. Judge Thornton considered. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor. Caldwell turned back to Evelyn. Did they assault you, Miss Cross? They beat me when I didn't work fast enough, when I talked back, when they were drunk and angry and needed someone to hurt who wouldn't fight back. Her voice was shaking now. Is that assault enough for you? But no sexual assault? No. Isn't that strange? A gang of violent criminals holding a young woman captive for 7 months, and yet they never... It's not strange if you understand that Cutter Hayes was smart enough to know that damaged property is worth less than undamaged property. Evelyn's eyes blazed. He kept me intact because I was more valuable as potential leverage that way. Not because they were kind, because they were calculating. Caldwell's expression didn't change. You mentioned your brother attempted escape several times. What happened during his final attempt? He grabbed me during a robbery outside Cheyenne. We ran. They shot him. They shot him while he was running away with you. Yes. So your brother died trying to save you? Yes. Tears were streaming down Evelyn's face now. And yet here you are. Alive. Safe. Free, while he's dead. Caldwell's voice went soft, almost gentle. Don't you think Thomas would wonder why you survived when he didn't? Don't you think he might question what you did to earn that survival? Objection! Webb was shouting. Counsel is badgering the witness with speculation about a dead man's thoughts. Sustained, Judge Thornton glared at Caldwell. Rephrase or move on. But the damage was done. The jury had heard the implication that Evelyn had somehow bargained her survival at her brother's expense. Caldwell pressed on, attacking her memory, her timeline, her motives for testifying. He suggested she'd invented the conversations about Langley and his partners to gain attention. He pointed out inconsistencies in dates that were actually just normal memory errors from a traumatic period. The cross-examination lasted 3 hours. By the time Caldwell finally said no further questions, Evelyn looked like she'd been beaten all over again. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. She stepped down from the witness stand on shaking legs. Boone met her at the gate separating the gallery from the court floor and pulled her against his chest, not caring who saw or what they thought. You did good, he whispered. That bastard tried everything and you held. I don't feel like I held. I feel like I broke. You didn't break. You bent. There's a difference. Judge Thornton called a recess until the following morning. The courtroom emptied slowly, spectators chattering about the dramatic testimony. Boone guided Evelyn through the crowd and out into the street where the late afternoon sun felt like absolution after hours in that oppressive room. They walked in silence back to their boarding house. Neither had words for what had just happened, how the law's search for truth could feel so much like another violation. The trial continued for 8 more days. Boone testified about the siege at Raven Hollow, confirming Evelyn's account and providing details about Langley's attack. The prosecution presented financial records, letters, testimony from surviving gang members who'd turned state's evidence in exchange for lighter sentences. Expert accountants explained how stolen money had been laundered through the defendants' businesses. The defense attacked every piece of evidence, every witness, every inference. They painted the defendants as victims of a vindictive prosecution based on the unreliable testimony of a traumatized woman and a hermit mountain man with a grudge against civilized society. During Boone's cross-examination, Caldwell tried to suggest he'd killed Langley not in self-defense, but in revenge for his family's death years earlier. You blame Victor Langley for your wife and son's deaths, don't you? Caldwell asked. I blame everyone who voted to quarantine them instead of help them, Langley included. So you had motive to kill him beyond simple self-defense. I had motive. I also had 8 armed men attacking my home and trying to murder a woman under my protection. The motive that mattered was staying alive. Convenient that your revenge and your self-defense aligned so perfectly. Boone leaned forward. If I'd wanted revenge, I would have hunted Langley down years ago. I'm good at hunting. He wouldn't have seen me coming. Instead, I isolated myself on a mountain and tried to forget he existed. When he came to my cabin with hired guns, I defended myself and the woman he was trying to kill. That's not revenge. That's survival. Webb's redirect focused on the physical evidence, bullet trajectories proving the defenders had fired from inside the cabin, wounds consistent with Boone's account, testimony from Marshal Kane confirming the scene matched a defensive action rather than an ambush. By the time both sides rested, the courtroom had heard 14 days of testimony from 37 witnesses. Mountains of evidence. Hours of expert analysis. Now it came down to 12 men in a jury box deciding what to believe. Closing arguments took place on a Friday morning. Webb went first, summarizing the case with prosecutorial efficiency. Gentlemen of the jury, you've heard testimony placing these defendants at the center of a criminal conspiracy that resulted in dozens of deaths and hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen property. You've seen documentary evidence of payments and communications. You've heard from witnesses with no reason to lie and every reason to fear retaliation. The facts are clear. The guilt is established. Justice demands conviction. Caldwell's closing was longer, more theatrical. He attacked Evelyn's credibility one final time, suggesting she was an unreliable witness whose trauma had confused memory with imagination. He portrayed the defendants as successful men being persecuted by an overreaching federal government looking for scapegoats after failing to stop the Hayes gang in time. These men are innocent, Caldwell concluded, and your verdict must reflect that innocence, regardless of the prosecution's desire for convenient justice. Judge Thornton instructed the jury on the law, explaining standards of proof and the specific elements required for each charge. Then he sent them to deliberate. Boone and Evelyn waited in the courthouse hallway, along with dozens of others. Minutes felt like hours. Hours felt like days. Lawyers paced. Spectators gossiped. The defendants sat in a side room looking confident or terrified, depending on their individual capacity for self-delusion. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. When they finally returned, the courtroom filled so fast that latecomers had to stand along the walls. Boone and Evelyn took their seats behind the prosecution table. Webb looked tense. Caldwell looked smug. Judge Thornton took his place at the bench. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman stood, a middle-aged shopkeeper from Cheyenne named Morrison. "We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit robbery, how do you find the defendant Richard Stanton?" "Guilty." The word hit like thunder. Stanton's face went white. Around the courtroom, reactions rippled, gasps, murmurs, a few quiet cheers quickly silenced by the judge's glare. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit robbery, how do you find the defendant Henry Carlisle?" "Guilty." Morrison continued through all 4 defendants and all charges. Guilty, guilty, guilty. By the time he finished, the prosecution had won convictions on 37 of 42 counts. Only a few minor fraud charges had resulted in acquittals. Judge Thornton's gavel cracked down. "The defendants will remain in custody pending sentencing. This court is adjourned." The courtroom erupted. Boone pulled Evelyn close as people surged around them, journalists pushing toward the defendants, spectators celebrating or protesting, lawyers gathering documents. Webb fought his way through the crowd to shake their hands. "We did it," he said, actually smiling. "Couldn't have done it without your testimony, Miss Cross, both of you." "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. "Sentencing in 2 weeks. Given the severity of the crimes and the number of deaths connected to their conspiracy, I expect significant prison time. Stanton and Carlisle will likely face 20 years minimum. The others, possibly more. And us? You're free to go. The inquest into Mr. Mercer's actions found justifiable homicide. No charges will be filed. You're both cleared." Free to go, cleared, vindicated. The words should have felt like victory. Instead, they felt like exhaustion, the kind that came from fighting so long you'd forgotten what peace felt like. Marshal Kane found them outside the courthouse as the sun was setting over Cheyenne's rooftops. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Personally. What you did in that courtroom took courage most people don't have. Facing down those lawyers, reliving trauma, risking your reputations." He shook Boone's hand, then Evelyn's. "The territory owes you a debt." "The territory can keep it," Boone said. "We just want to go home." Kane smiled. "I don't blame you, but before you do, there's something you should know. We found the bonds." Evelyn's eyes widened. "The railroad bonds? From Red Hollow? Exactly where you said they'd be. Twisted juniper, red rocks, dry creek bed. Federal excavation team found them buried in a metal lockbox 3 feet down. 50,000 in bearer bonds, just like Hayes claimed." "What happens to them?" "Returned to the railroad they were stolen from. But there's a reward for information leading to recovery. 5% of the total value." Kane pulled an envelope from his coat. "That's $2,500, Miss Cross. Your share for providing the details that made recovery possible." Evelyn stared at the envelope like it might explode. "I can't take that." "Why not? You earned it. Your testimony put criminals in prison and recovered stolen property. The law says you're entitled to compensation." "But I didn't do it for money." "Doesn't matter why you did it. The reward exists whether you want it or not." Kane pressed the envelope into her hands. "Take it. Build something good with it. You've earned that chance." After Kane left, Evelyn opened the envelope and stared at the bank draft inside. $2,500. More money than she'd ever seen in her life. More than most frontier families earned in 5 years. "This is real," she said quietly. "It's real. We could do anything with this. Go anywhere. Start over completely." Boone pulled her close. "Or we could go back to Raven Hollow and build the life we already started. Is that what you want?" "More than anything." She folded the envelope and tucked it into her coat. "Then that's what we'll do." They left Cheyenne the next morning. The ride back to Blackthorn Ridge took 4 days, and they didn't rush it. Spring had fully arrived across the territory, wildflowers covering the meadows, streams running clear and cold with snowmelt, new grass greening the hillsides. The land looked reborn after winter's death grip. When they finally reached the town, Boone expected the same hostile reception Evelyn had endured for months. Instead, they found something different. Eleanor Hawthorne met them in the street, arms full of supplies. "Thank heavens you're back. I've been worried sick. How did the trial go?" "Guilty verdicts on almost everything," Evelyn said. "We testified. It was horrible. But it's over." "Good. Those men deserved prison." Mrs. Hawthorne pressed the supplies into Evelyn's hands. "This is for you. Flour, coffee, sugar, and some fabric I thought you might like, for making proper curtains in that cabin." "Mrs. Hawthorne, I can pay now. The federal reward—" "I don't want your money, child. I want you to have a home. Now get up that mountain before I start crying in the middle of Front Street and embarrass us both." Other townspeople stopped them during the ride through Blackthorn Ridge. Not everyone. Some still crossed the street or looked away. But enough people offered cautious greetings or quiet apologies that it was clear something had shifted. News of the trial had spread, news of the convictions, news that Evelyn Cross had been telling the truth all along. Shame was a powerful thing. It didn't erase the cruelty she'd endured, but it made people want to make amends in whatever small ways they could manage. The climb to Raven Hollow took 2 hours. When the cabin finally came into view through the pine trees, Boone felt something in his chest loosen. Home. Not just a structure or a location, but a place that meant safety and belonging, and the future he'd stopped believing in 6 years ago. They dismounted and unpacked in comfortable silence. Boone checked the cabin for damage from weather or animals and found everything intact. Evelyn started a fire in the stove and put coffee on to boil. That night, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the Wyoming wilderness. The sky turned gold, then orange, then purple as darkness crept up from the valleys. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, lonely and wild and free. "I've been thinking," Evelyn said, "about what to do with the reward money. And? We should use some of it to expand the cabin, make it a real home instead of a bachelor's shelter. Proper windows, a separate bedroom, maybe even a small library for those books Sarah left." Boone smiled. "That sounds good. What about the rest?" "I want to give some to Mrs. Hawthorne for her kindness when no one else would help, and maybe donate some to the Territorial Orphanage in Laramie, in Thomas's name. He'd like that." "I think so too." She leaned against Boone's shoulder. "And the rest we save. For emergencies, for the future, for whatever comes next." "What do you think comes next?" "I don't know. A quieter life, hopefully. One where we're not fighting for survival every day. Where we can just exist together." Boone wrapped his arm around her. "That sounds perfect." They sat like that until full dark. Two people who'd survived hell and found each other in the aftermath, watching stars emerge over mountains that had witnessed their worst moments and would now witness their best. The weeks turned into months. Summer arrived with long days and warm nights. Boone hired men from Blackthorn Ridge to help expand the cabin, turning it from a simple shelter into something that could house a family. They added a bedroom, expanded the main room, built a proper root cellar, and a covered porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Evelyn planted a garden near the creek, vegetables mostly, but also flowers that Sarah had once grown. She filled the cabin with small touches that made it feel lived in. Curtains on the windows, books on shelves Boone built, a quilt she sewed during long evenings while he carved wood or maintained equipment. They made the trip to Blackthorn Ridge once a month for supplies and to maintain connections with the town. Slowly, carefully, Evelyn rebuilt a reputation based on truth instead of lies. Some people never forgave her for surviving what they thought should have destroyed her, but enough people did that she could walk the streets without fear. In August, Marshal Kane visited with news. "Sentencing happened last week," he said over coffee in the cabin's main room. "Stanton got 25 years, Carlisle got 20. The others between 15 and 20, depending on their level of involvement." "They'll die in prison," Evelyn said. "Most likely, they're not young men." Kane set down his cup. "There's talk of more investigations. Other territories where Langley had connections. More criminals who might have been part of his network. This case opened doors that'll stay open for years." "Good," Boone said. "Men like that shouldn't be able to hide behind money and respectability." "No, they shouldn't, and thanks to you two, fewer of them can." Kane stood to leave. One more thing. The railroad wants to thank you properly for recovering those bonds. They're sending a formal letter of commendation. Might even want to do a ceremony in Cheyenne. We're not interested in ceremonies, Evelyn said quickly. I told them you'd say that, but the letter's coming anyway. You earned recognition whether you want it or not. After Kane left, Boone and Evelyn stood on the porch watching his horse descend the mountain trail. Do you think it's really over? Evelyn asked. The fighting, the trials, all of it. I think the official part is over. But the rest, learning to live without looking over our shoulders, trusting that good things can last, that takes longer. How long did it take you? After Sarah and Jacob. 6 years. And I didn't really succeed until you showed up and forced me to try again. He pulled her close. But we'll do it faster together. That's how it works. Healing's easier when you're not alone. She kissed him, soft and certain. Then we heal together. The letter from the railroad arrived in September, formal and effusive in its gratitude. It came with another reward payment, $1,000 for extraordinary service to justice and commercial enterprise. Evelyn donated half to the orphanage and used the rest to buy medical supplies for the circuit doctor who served the mountain communities. Boone built a new storage shed for his trapping equipment and bought a better rifle for hunting season. They were building something neither had believed possible 6 months ago, a life defined not by what they'd survived, but by what they chose to create. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell in October, dusting the mountains white and reminding Boone and Evelyn of how they'd met. But this time, the cabin was warm and well-stocked. The walls were solid. The roof didn't leak. They had enough supplies to last until spring with room to spare. One evening in late November, Evelyn sat by the fire reading while Boone maintained his trap lines. She looked up from her book and watched him work. This scarred, difficult man who'd saved her life and then taught her how to live again. Boone? Yeah? Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't come looking for me that night? If you'd stayed in your cabin and let the storm do Langley's work for him? He set down his tools. Sometimes. Usually right before I fall asleep. What do you think would have happened? You'd be dead. I'd still be alone. Langley would still be terrorizing the territory. And we'd both have missed the best thing that ever happened to either of us. That's a depressing list of alternate outcomes. It's also why I don't think about it much. What actually happened is better than any alternative I can imagine. She closed her book and moved to sit beside him. I used to pray for rescue when I was with the gang. Every night I'd wish for someone to save me. And then Thomas died trying to do exactly that. And I thought maybe the universe was telling me I wasn't worth saving. You were worth saving. I know that now. But it took you believing it first before I could. She took his hand. You gave me back my life. Not just by pulling me out of that snowdrift, but by treating me like a person when everyone else treated me like a problem, by standing beside me when it cost you everything, by loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Boone pulled her closer. You did the same for me. Reminded me I was human instead of just angry. Gave me a reason to care about more than survival. Made this place feel like a home instead of a grave. They sat together in the firelight, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and built something beautiful from the wreckage. Outside, snow began to fall, but inside Raven Hollow's cabin, there was only warmth. Spring arrived again, as it always did. The snow melted. The creeks ran high. Wildflowers bloomed across the meadows in colors so bright they hurt to look at. Boone's trap lines filled with beaver and marten. Evelyn's garden produced more vegetables than they could eat, so she started trading the surplus with families in the valley below. On a warm afternoon in May, almost exactly 1 year after the trial, they stood together on the porch watching storm clouds gather over the distant peaks. Rain's coming, Boone observed. Good. The garden needs it. We should check the roof, make sure the new sections are sealed. Later. Right now I just want to stand here with you and watch the weather change. So they stood there, watching lightning flicker in the clouds and listening to thunder roll across the mountains. The storm came closer, bringing wind that smelled like rain and ozone and the particular electricity that preceded frontier tempests. The first drops fell large and heavy, splashing against the porch boards and darkening the earth. Within minutes, it was pouring, a summer storm fierce and cleansing, washing away dust and memory in equal measure. Evelyn laughed and stepped out into the rain, letting it soak through her dress and plaster her hair to her head. She spun in circles like a child, face turned toward the sky. Come on, she called to Boone. It's glorious. It's also freezing. Don't be practical. Be alive. So Boone stepped off the porch and into the rain. Evelyn grabbed his hands and pulled him into her spinning dance, both of them soaked and laughing and absolutely ridiculous. This was what surviving meant. Not just enduring pain and fighting through darkness, but reaching the other side and finding joy in simple moments. Finding someone who understood your scars and loved you anyway. Finding a place where you belonged completely. The rain poured down. The thunder crashed. The lightning split the sky. And in a cabin high above the Wyoming frontier, two people who'd been broken by life and rebuilt each other danced in the storm, celebrating the simple fact of being alive and together. Later, when the storm had passed and they sat by the fire drying off, Evelyn asked the question Boone had been waiting for. Do you think we'll always be happy, or is this just temporary? A brief good moment before the next crisis? Boone considered carefully before answering. I think happiness on the frontier isn't a destination. It's something you build every day. Some days you build more than others. Some days you just maintain what you've already got. And some days storms tear things down and you have to rebuild from scratch. He took her hand. But I also think if you're building with the right person, the rebuilding's not as hard, and the structure gets stronger each time you repair it. That's a very practical view of happiness. I'm a practical man. You're also a good man, better than you give yourself credit for. I'm a man who learned that survival alone isn't enough, that you need people worth surviving for, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone else see your broken places and trust them not to use those places as weapons. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder. I love you, Boone Mercer. I love you too. They sat there as the fire burned down, and the evening turned to night, neither needing to say anything more because some truths didn't require elaboration. The world outside would keep turning. Winters would come and go. Storms would rage. People would make the same mistakes humans had always made, choosing fear over compassion, judgment over understanding, comfort over courage. But in this cabin, in this moment, two people who'd survived the worst the frontier could offer had found something the frontier couldn't touch. They'd found each other. And that was worth every fight, every scar, every moment of fear and pain that had led them here. Because in the end, survival wasn't the victory. Love was. And in the high country of Raven Hollow, where the mountains touched the sky and the wilderness stretched forever, Boone Mercer and Evelyn Cross had built a kingdom that would outlast any storm. Not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. And that was enough.